As you begin to explore the Leslie Palacio case, it is impossible not to feel bewildered and disappointed that justice has not yet been served. The killer remains at large, even though the police have all the evidence and his identity is known to them. Today's story underscores the difficulty of investigating crimes when suspects find themselves outside the jurisdiction, and victims can only hope that the perpetrators will be found and brought to justice. The morning of the 29th brought anxiety to the home of Rosalia Palacio, mother of 5 lovely daughters. Her eldest daughter, Kayla, came down to the kitchen and reported that the bed in Leslie's room was untouched. Her belongings were gone, and she clearly hadn't spent the night at home. One of the sisters joked that it must have been a pretty fun night at the club, and Leslie had probably stayed the night at Eric's. In fact, everyone became alarmed, since Leslie had never done this before. Over breakfast, Kayla kept glancing at her phone, expecting a waking Leslie to be about to text. Time passed, but still no word from Leslie. By noon, it stopped seeming normal. By late afternoon, Rosalia decided to go to Eric's house on her own and find out where her daughter had disappeared to. When the Palacio family members drove up to the house, they saw Eric's mother and his sister actively removing pieces of furniture and miscellaneous items from the house. Obviously, taking furniture out of the house is quite normal, but the situation itself and Mrs. Ibarra's crying face caused a very strange feeling for Rosalia. Something was not right here. When asked where Leslie was and why Eric's phone was unavailable, Eric's mother and sister pretended that they didn't even know that the couple had spent the evening together. Rosalia once again clarified whether Leslie had slept over at their house that night, because she knew from her daughter's messages that she was going to Eric's house. After receiving a negative response, Leslie's family realized the seriousness of what was happening. Fears became reality, and the family immediately took action. The older sister, realizing that Leslie could not have disappeared so easily, began calling local hospitals and searching the internet for reports of accidents in the last 24 hours. However, the search was unsuccessful, as were attempts to contact Eric. He had either turned off his phone or the phone was dead, as Kayla couldn't even hear the voicemail. Rosalia had no choice but to call the police. The next day, August 30th, Leslie was officially reported missing. The move was the first in an intense fight for justice. Leslie Palacio was born on May 5, 1998, in Las Vegas, Nevada, USA. Her short but full life was full of love and caring for her family. Always open and friendly girl became a source of joy in any company, as she valued everyone she met in her life and was reciprocated. Leslie dreamed of connecting her life with medicine. After graduating from high school, she entered the Las Vegas Medical College. In 2020, she was already confidently moving towards her dream of becoming a phlebotomist and worked part-time as a lab technician, combining theoretical knowledge with practical skills. Leslie proved herself to be a talented student. Her academic achievements were admirable. She was able to easily assimilate new material and always strive to deepen her knowledge. That is why the girl decided to work part-time as a laboratory assistant. Unexpectedly, Leslie realized that she had found her calling and soon became an integral part of the team. Colleagues considered the student not only a responsible and professional lab technician, but also a warm, responsive person. The girl's duties included conducting various analyses and tests, but for Leslie, this work was much more than just a fulfillment of duties. She saw her calling in the ability to make the process of taking tests as comfortable as possible for patients. Her caring and patience created an atmosphere of trust, and even those who were apprehensive about the procedure felt at ease in her presence. When the youngest of the nurses asked if Leslie was afraid of getting her hands pierced all the time, she laughingly replied that she now had a super ability to poke people. The young optimist's vitality was evident in her every action. By all accounts, Leslie had the unique potential to become a sought-after and valuable specialist in the field of medical laboratory diagnostics, and she would have, if not for a dramatic turn of events. Leslie has been used to helping and caring for everyone since childhood. As the second of 5 daughters, she took on the role of mother when Rosalia Palacio worked as a hotel cleaner. Rosalia recalled her daughter kicking her out of the kitchen when she tried to cook dinner after cleaning more than 15 hotel rooms in a shift. "Get some rest," Leslie gently urged her. Wanting to relieve her mother's burden after work, her daughter took it upon herself to prepare dinners and, in her characteristic easygoing manner, found cooking to be a source of inspiration. From then on, she always made sure her family members were very well fed, and even if she was away and couldn't make the family dinner herself, she always called home to make sure everyone had eaten. For Leslie, family came first, and she easily inspired her sisters with her energy and ideas. For example, even during the pandemic, Leslie didn't let sports disappear by organizing workouts in the backyard of the house. She taught her mother various exercises, and with her sisters she danced daily in front of the mirror to music. Her love of experimenting with hair color and image turned it into a joint business plan with her older sister to open a boutique. The sisters began designing and sewing dresses at home in their own unique style. When the coronavirus pandemic happened and Rosalia was laid off due to downsizing, Leslie suggested her mother start her own small cleaning company and assured her that she would definitely help her with the cleanings in her free time from work and school. "Mom, we'll be fine soon, you'll see," she assured Rosalia. At a family council, they came up with a name for the company, the Palacio Cleaning Service. At the time Leslie disappeared, her dreams were just beginning to be realized. Their family firm had landed its first contract. But on August 29, 2020, all of the Palacio family's plans and dreams came crashing down. At the end of August 2020, Leslie completed the lab assistant program, and the family firm also received a large order. The girl decided it was time to take a break from the stresses and worries and enjoy an evening of dancing and fun. Especially the restrictions due to the pandemic were gradually being lifted, and Las Vegas began to come alive. Unfortunately, none of the friends wanted to keep Leslie company. Although people were beginning to let go of their fears and return to their normal lives, they still felt nervous and anxious at the prospect of being in a closed space with lots of people. Leslie didn't give up hope of convincing someone to have fun and posted a post on Instagram expressing her desire to spend the evening somewhere. Unexpectedly, she received a message from Eric Rangel Ibarra. Leslie and Eric's parents had been attending the same church for 14 years and occasionally socialized. So the children had known each other since childhood, but had never interacted closely. Leslie knew what Eric liked. The guy texted her, showed her attention, but Leslie never reciprocated. She was polite to him, however. On any other day, Leslie would have declined Eric's desire to keep her company, but not this time. She was eager to dilute her ordinary life with a fun evening. The whole day passed in anticipation and anticipation. And when none of Leslie's friends wanted to keep her company, she accepted Eric's polite and warm offer to reminisce about Las Vegas nightlife. Sharing a night out with Eric seemed like a better choice than going nowhere at all. Expecting a fun adventure, Leslie had no idea what horrible events awaited her, but she probably had a premonition of something, trying to rationalize to herself that there was no cause for concern. Anyway, Leslie agreed with her sister that she would send her regular messages, telling her exactly where she was. She also told Kayla in great detail where she was going and with whom and what places she might end up in. After a while, the older sister received a strange message. "Can you believe Eric is totally not going to drink this evening? We're at a party, but it looks like I'm going to have to party alone." Afterward, the sisters exchanged joking messages on the topic of healthy living. The first place Eric and Leslie went to was the casino at the Longhorn Hotel. Police officers would later see on surveillance footage of the couple getting out of a white Ford F-250 owned by Eric, at 0:31 a.m. on Ayug 29 and entering the casino, then leaving a short time later at 1:56 a.m. The couple would then leave the casino. Leslie kept in contact with her sister, telling her what was going on. At 4:40 a.m., Leslie sent her sister another strange message. "I need to talk to you about something shitty." Kayla asked what happened and, according to her, a text box popped up, as if Leslie had started to reply, but no answer ever came. That text message was the last of the girl's life. The morning of the 29th came. Leslie still hadn't returned home. The more time passed, the more concerned the Palacio family members became. The certainty that Leslie had stayed the night at Eric's house was replaced by confusion, and the family went to a familiar house, where they found a strange scene. Mrs. Ibarra and her daughter were taking out furniture, pretending that they had heard for the first time that Leslie and Eric had spent the evening together. In fact, Leslie's family arrived at Eric's house just in time. If they had arrived a few hours later, the investigation would have been significantly delayed. The police found traces of blood in the house, a mess in the bedroom, which suggests that Eric's mother and his sister spent the whole day, strangely enough, not to clean up the traces of the crime, but to pack things, down to the pieces of furniture. The family was clearly not going on a picnic, but planning a long-term and thorough absence. Most likely, they had arranged to reunite with Eric and his father, Jose, in Mexico, where the two had traveled in order to escape justice. Upon seeing the Palacio family, Mrs. Ibarra probably realized that the chance to leave was gone, leaving evidence in the house that no one would take the time to clean up. Panicked, mother and daughter began to simply deny knowing about Leslie and Eric's evening together. It was this behavior that led to the suspicion that something irreparable had happened. Fortunately, the Las Vegas police took immediate action and sent out a billing inquiry intending to track Leslie's movements since the previous night. But unfortunately, it takes some time to get that data, while the Palacios couldn't sit back and wait. The family started a campaign to spread the word about Leslie's disappearance. People responded and began actively sharing the information on social media. No one expected that there would be so many people who cared. Eric's mom especially didn't expect it. Detectives kept asking more and more questions, and on August 31st, Mrs. Ibarra went to the police station and filed a missing persons report for her husband and son. Mrs. Ibarra told police that her son, Eric, left home late in the evening on August 28th. And when he returned the next morning, he was acting strangely. She saw him walk out the door and never returned. The police noticed a strange circumstance. Not only was Leslie missing, but Eric was also missing, as well as his father. Based on this, an investigation into the triple disappearance began, with the Las Vegas police involved. Detectives turned to the residents of the neighborhood with the hope of finding surveillance cameras that recorded something important. Luck smiled. It was discovered that just across the street from Jose Ibarra's home, there were surveillance cameras. In addition to the CCTV footage, police obtained billing data that allowed them to track Leslie's movements in the early morning hours of the 29th. Detectives found that the couple went to the casino and afterward to a grill bar, which they reached around 02:15 a.m. Accidentally or not, Leslie's cell phone was left at the bar, and the records show that Leslie left the establishment around 5:50 a.m., which is quite early in the morning. At 06:05 a.m., neighborhood cameras captured Eric's car pulling up to the family home. The nature of his assistance to Leslie in getting out of the car and on the way to the house clearly indicated that the girl was heavily intoxicated. At 07:25 a.m., Eric and his father, Jose, are seen carrying Leslie's body out of the house, wrapped in a sheet, and placing it in the trunk of the car. Eric then drives away while Jose hoses down the driveway to their house. These actions clearly indicated that Eric and Jose were not missing, but were fugitives from justice. After police saw the footage, a search warrant was obtained for Ibarra's home. As a result, detectives uncovered a lot of additional evidence showing that Leslie had not left the house voluntarily. The house had been cleaned with cleaning products in an unsuccessful attempt. Latex gloves and trash bags were also found. But the most important piece of evidence was the discovery in Eric's room. Traces of blood were found on the floor and on Eric's bed, an obvious sign of assault. And without DNA testing, it was clear to investigators that the blood belonged to Leslie. From that point on, Leslie Palacio was no longer missing, and investigators focused their efforts on finding her body. Eric and Jose were reported missing. As investigators searched diligently for suspects, the shaken Palacio family made efforts as well. Roselia asked members of the church community to help search for her daughter's body as search volunteers. Flyers and posters with Leslie's photo and images of Eric and Jose appeared on social media, newspapers, and street poles. The Palacio family is asking the public to intervene and help them find these two men involved in the girl's death, was the message on each flyer. The first major breakthrough in the investigation came when a license plate reader spotted Eric's car just 6 miles from his home around 10 a.m. August 29. He was heading back to his home just 4 hours after Leslie's alleged murder. The information uncovered made investigators realize that the location where Eric may have hidden the body was within a 4-hour drive of his home, on the Nevada-Arizona border, or the Charleston Peak side, which is a huge area. So detectives were desperate for any additional information that could help them determine a more precise location. Once again, luck smiled on them when footage was recorded at a gas station 40 miles north of Las Vegas, showing Eric's car pulling off the highway toward the Valley of Fire National Park. The car backed up 20 minutes later with muddy tires. The find narrowed the search and pointed to the possible location of the body within 20 miles of the gas station. The mud on the tires suggested that Eric had driven off the road at some point. Detectives began searching the area. Police and volunteers combed through hundreds of acres of land. And on September 9, during a second search, they found Leslie Palacio's body hidden near a bush. News outlets immediately spread the word. The body of 22-year-old Leslie Palacio has been found near the Valley of Fire, 11 days after she disappeared. A reporter joined the report, providing additional details about the prime suspect, 25-year-old Eric Rangel Ibarra. The Valley of Fire, where the body was found, is known for its hot climate, which led to rapid decomposition of the remains, and forensic experts were unable to determine the exact cause of death. Locals reacted to Leslie's death with horror and fear. Some became afraid to go outside because of the constant thoughts of the Unearthed criminals involved in the murder. The day after the body was discovered, September 10th, many friends, relatives, neighbors, and just random people in the area gathered to honor Leslie's memory. People took candles that were used for the nightly vigil and placed them in front of the girl's house. They also said they wanted the man responsible for her death to pay for what he did. The fight for justice was not even close to being over at this point. The next major breakthrough came when Eric's car flashed in Moreno Valley, California. Police eventually contacted Eric's cousin, and he reported that he had driven Jose and his son to San Isidro, where he believed they planned to cross the border into Mexico. The Las Vegas Police Department requested assistance from the FBI because it was not possible for them to resolve the jurisdictional issue on their own. The investigation slowed down. Then, on January 19, 2021, 4 months after the discovery of the girl's remains, Eric's father, Jose, turned himself in at the border. Everyone was greatly relieved that at least one fugitive was now in custody. The man was quickly extradited back to Clark County and charged with destruction of evidence and accessory to murder. During interrogations, Jose tried to minimize his involvement in the crime, explaining the story of the trip to Mexico by his son's strange behavior on the morning of August 29th. However, investigators showing surveillance video footage debunked his false claims. The footage clearly showed him helping carry Leslie's body out of the house and washing the driveway. Faced with the evidence, Jose changed his testimony. He said he was working in the garage when Eric brought Leslie's body, wrapped in a sheet, into the garage. According to Jose, he panicked and helped his son load the body into the truck, assuming that Leslie had died of an overdose of illegal drugs because he saw no visible injuries on the body. Court documents indicate that Jose initially told police that, according to Eric, Leslie died of an overdose of illegal drugs. Jose also explained that Eric immediately talked about wanting to end his life, blamed himself, and so he decided that the best thing to do for his son was to take him to Mexico. When investigators asked Jose for Eric's current whereabouts, he explained that as soon as the two of them entered Mexico and boarded the bus was searched by Mexican authorities. He and his son got scared and decided to split up, thinking that apart it would be harder for the authorities to find them. For this reason, he would love to help the investigation, but has absolutely no idea where his son might be. On June 18, 2021, Jose formally pleaded guilty to destruction of evidence and accessory to murder. Despite the horrific characteristics of his crimes, Jose Ibarra was sentenced to only 2 years in the Clark County Detention Center, causing shock and dismay in the community. The Palacio family was shocked and outraged by Jose's lenient sentence, which they felt was unjust. During the pandemonium, Jose Ibarra joined the court proceedings virtually, while Leslie's family and friends attended in person. They urged the judge to impose a harsher sentence, arguing that 2 years was not enough for an accessory to murder who helped dispose of the body and hid the perpetrator. Jose Ibarra pleaded guilty and tried to apologize to Palacio's family, saying his love for his son outweighed him. He expressed regret for his actions. However, Leslie's family did not accept his apology and did not consider it sincere. To date, Eric's whereabouts remain unknown, and he continues to live a free life in Mexico. Jose was released on April 28, 2022. Ofelia Marcarian, attorney and representative of the Palacio family, commented as follows: "I am absolutely furious. This is simply unfair. Not only is the main suspect not in custody, now the one who was involved in covering up the murder is back in custody after serving 8 months and 15 days. Over the past 3 years, the Palacio family has never gotten justice. Leslie's story highlights the flaws in the justice system and raises questions about fairness in dealing with serious crimes. The Palacio family is determined to fight to change the law in Nevada because they believe that whoever was involved in the murder should receive a longer prison sentence than 2 years. They hope that the perpetrator will be found and prosecuted in the United States, where he will be charged and given the punishment he deserves." Ofelia Marcarian is directly reaching out to those who may know of Eric's whereabouts in Mexico. In every media interview, she calls for Palacio's family to be given a small measure of justice.
Shafilea Ahmed was born on July 14, 1986, a British Pakistani girl. Shafilea's father, Iftikhar Ahmed, originally hailed from the Gujarat district of Pakistan. At the age of about 20 to 22, Iftikhar moved to Britain for employment. While staying there for a while and during work, Iftikhar falls in love with a foreign girl and marries her. Soon he becomes a father, but when he returns to Pakistan and informs his family about his marriage, they do not accept it. Then Iftikhar's family puts heavy pressure on him to marry another Pakistani girl. Despite Iftikhar's resistance, he eventually succumbs to his family's insistence, and he marries a Pakistani girl named Farzana. After the marriage, Iftikhar returns to Britain and, after revealing the truth to his first wife, divorces her. Then, after some time, Iftikhar calls his second wife, Farzana, to Britain from Pakistan. After coming to Britain, Iftikhar starts living with his wife in the city of Bradford in West Yorkshire. It is here that on July 14, 1986, Shafilea Ahmed is born. Shortly after Shafilea's birth, the family moves to the town of Warrington in Britain. It is here that Shafilea completes her early education. During this time, 2 more daughters are born in the family, and Iftikhar's family grows larger. Although this family resides in Britain, on holidays, Iftikhar used to take his wife and all his children to Pakistan for vacation. Now the year had come, 2003, and by now Shafilea Ahmed had also turned 17 and was studying law. Her dream was to become a lawyer. When Shafilea and the other children have a break on February 18, 2003, Shafilea comes to Pakistan with her family for vacation. During their trip to Pakistan, this family also participates in a family wedding ceremony. However, just a few days after this wedding, a major incident occurs with Shafilea. She accidentally drinks phenyl floor cleaner. Actually, phenyl is commonly used in Asia for cleaning floors in homes. Now, because phenyl is made by mixing some chemicals and soap, drinking it causes severe pain in Shafilea's throat. The reason behind Shafilea drinking phenyl is initially said to be because her parents pressured her into arranged marriage with a Pakistani boy. Because of this pressure, Shafilea drank the phenyl intending to end her life. But later, her parents claimed that someone had poured phenyl into an old bottle of water, kept in the same bottle usually used for drinking water, and in the darkness of the night, Shafilea mistook phenyl for water and drank it. Due to this mistake, Shafilea had to endure a lot of pain. As a result, she's admitted to a hospital in Pakistan. Now, because Shafilea's injury was quite severe, she has to stay in the hospital for a long time. During this time, the holidays of other family members also end, so Iftikhar takes his 2 children and wife back to Britain, while Shafilea has to stay in Pakistan for treatment. However, shortly after, Iftikhar arranges for Shafilea's return as well, and on May 27, 2003, Shafilea returns to Britain. Straight from the airport, Shafilea is admitted to a hospital for treatment through an ambulance. After several months of treatment, Shafilea's throat heals considerably, and now she rejoins college. Alongside college, she also starts a part-time job. But on September 18, 2003, a college teacher notices that Shafilea Ahmed hasn't been coming to college for the past week. Attempts are made to contact Shafilea via phone, but she cannot be reached. When teacher asked about this to Shafilea's parents, they revealed that Shafilea has not been home for the past week. Their daughter has been missing for a week, and her parents hadn't filed any complaints about her yet, which strikes Shafilea's teacher as very strange. Immediately after this, they inform the police. Upon filing the case, a police team arrives at Shafilea's house for investigation, and questioning begins with her parents. Shafilea's parents say that they last saw Shafilea at their home on September 11, 2003, and since then, she hasn't been seen. Upon this, the police ask, "When your daughter has been missing for a week, why haven't you filed a complaint with the police yet?" To this, Shafilea's parents respond, "This is not the first time Shafilea has been missing from home for a few days. It has happened several times before." To confirm this, when the police checked the records, it is revealed that Shafilea has been missing from home several times in the past. The first time was when Shafilea was only 12 years old. She went missing with her younger sister on March 10, 1998. Because of this, her parents had also filed a missing report for both their daughters with the police. However, at that time, Shafilea returned home with her sister as evening approached. According to records, Shafilea ran away from home for the second time on November 25, 2002. Once again, her father, Iftikhar Ahmad, filed a missing report for his daughter. After extensive searching, Shafilea was found by the police sitting in a park. According to police records, for the third time, Shafilea left home with a friend on February 3, 2003. This time, Shafilea did not return home for 2 days, and then on February 5, 2003, she went to a safe house for orphaned people and filed a report against her parents for domestic violence and mental abuse. After the report was filed, the police officer spoke with Shafilea Ahmed and her parents, and after everything was cleared up, Shafilea returned home. After this, on February 18, 2003, Shafilea, along with her 2 sisters and parents, goes to Pakistan for a family function and disappears from there shortly after returning to Britain. Now, looking at old records, the police also suspect that Shafilea Ahmed may have gone somewhere again this time and will return home in a few days. Therefore, the police try to find Shafilea in all those places where she could have gone. However, even after a few days, the police cannot find any trace of Shafilea from anywhere. Considering Shafilea's history of running away from home before, the police show a little laziness in the investigation this time. After this, some local media start making an issue out of the police's laziness. As a result, demand for a thorough search for Shafilea increases at the local level. Due to the progress in the Shafilea missing case, the police accelerate their investigation. Subsequently, they discover numerous poems written by Shafia at her home. These poems reveal her dissatisfaction with her household environment. Her parents wished for Shafia to lead a traditional Pakistani girl's life, but she favored Western culture. Through her poetry, she expressed this pain. As Shafilea's poems reach the public, the case gains momentum, putting pressure on the police to find her. Consequently, law enforcement intervenes, intensifying their search efforts in places Shafilea could have visited. Eventually, CCTV footage confirmed Shafilea's identity to her parents, confirming that the girl in the footage is indeed Shafilea Ahmad. A few days after Shafilea went missing, her parents identified her. This made the police believe that at least Shafilea was alive. However, a new turn in the case occurs when the CCTV footage shows Shafilea's class teacher. Actually, when the picture is shown to Shafilea's class teacher, they say that the girl in the photo is not Shafilea Ahmed. Some other people also confirm by watching the CCTV footage that the girl in the footage is not Shafilea. Now, the police find it very strange that Shafilea's parents themselves did not recognize their daughter from the CCTV footage. The police had many questions in their minds, and to find the answers to those questions, they secretly installed some audio recording devices at Shafilea's home. The police were listening to everything that was happening in Shafilea's house through an audio recording device. According to the recording, one day Iftikhar is heard saying, "In Britain, if you kill 40 people and there is no evidence against you, then the law here can't do anything to you." Additionally, one day Iftikhar Ahmad is heard saying, "If the police collect DNA samples from inside the car, what could happen?" Furthermore, the audio recording device captures some suspicious conversations that lead the police to suspect that perhaps Shafilea's father had something to do with his daughter. Now, because the police start to doubt Iftikhar Ahmed, they use his audio recordings as evidence, and on December 18, 2003, the police arrest Iftikhar and his wife Farzana Ahmed, along with 5 other family members, on charges of murdering Shafilea and hiding her body. The police had arrested these people solely on suspicion. The police hoped that during the investigation, some concrete evidence would be found against these peoples. However, no evidence was found against any of the arrested persons, and eventually, the police released them all. It had been a year since 2004, and there was still no evidence in the case of Shafilea Ahmed. The police were engaged in efforts to locate Shafilea. Meanwhile, floods occurred in the famous Kent River, flowing from the Sedgwick area of Britain. When the floods were under control, the body of a girl were found in extremely poor condition on the banks of this river. The distance between the place where the body was found and where Shafilea Ahmed had disappeared was 70 miles. But still, the police have doubts whether this corpse could be Shafilea's. However, to confirm this, DNA samples are collected from the dead body and then matched with the DNA of Iftikhar and Farzana. In this case, a major twist occurs when a body washed away in the flood matches with the DNA samples of Iftikhar. This meant that the body washed away from the river was not someone else's but Shafilea Ahmed's, meaning in the search for Shafilea Ahmed, whom the police had been looking for the past year, now reaches the police itself in the form of a corpse. Now, the biggest question in front of the police was who and why murdered Shafilea Ahmed. However, even before the statements and actions of Corpse's parents, there were doubts, and in 2003, these two, along with 5 others, were arrested. Therefore, once again, Shafilea's parents are arrested and questioned. The trial of this case is also going on, but even this time, no allegations can be proven against them, which leads the police to release them again. However, after that, the police detain some other suspects and proceed with the investigation against all of them. But despite many efforts, the police cannot reach the murderer. As time passes, people slowly start to forget about Shafilea Ahmed's case. Shafilea disappeared in 2003, and now it was 2010. That is, it had been 7 years since Shafilea's death. By now, Shafilea's family had also moved on from the incident and had become busy with their daily lives. But then, on August 25, 2010, a major theft occurs at Iftikhar Ahmed's house. By now, Iftikhar Ahmed's family had already become the center of attention in the city due to their daughter's disappearance. Due to this, when theft occurs in this house, it starts making headlines on the front page of newspapers. But once again, this puts heavy pressure on the police. Despite working honestly, the police quickly get involved in the search for the thief. After many days of hard work, the police make a revelation that surprises everyone. Actually, the police arrest not someone else, but Iftikhar Ahmed's daughter, Alicia Ahmed, on charges of theft in the house. In fact, Alicia was Shafilea's younger sister. According to Alicia, she didn't get as much money from home as she demanded and needed. Because of this, she orchestrated the theft of her father's money at her own home. However, the police had solved the theft case very quickly. But the police spot an opportunity here and now. They start talking to Alicia about her sister Shafilea, who disappeared many years ago, and reopen the file related to the Shafilea case. In the initial conversation, the police suspect that Alicia knows something about the disappearance of Shafilea that the world is still unaware of. The police officers try to uncover what happened with Shafilea, but Alicia refuses to cooperate with them. However, the police then tell Alicia, "You have orchestrated a theft in your own house, which could lead to a long prison sentence for you. But if you can provide any information about Shafilea that nobody else knows, your sentence could be significantly reduced." Afterwards, when Alicia reveals some details to the police, everyone is left stunned. Alicia explains, "It was not someone else but my father, Iftikhar, and my mother, Farzana Ahmed, who had beaten Shafilea Ahmad in front of all of us sisters. Then our father put polythene on her face, and due to suffocation, she was dead. Then he placed Shafilea's body in his car and threw it into the distant jungle. However, due to the flood, the body drifted to the riverbank from the jungle." According to Alicia, Iftikhar and Farzara did not like their daughter's modern lifestyle at all. On the surface, Shafilea started falling in love with a boy, and when this matter comes to light, Iftikhar and Farzana quickly try to arrange Shafilea's marriage with their preferred boy. When the family goes to Pakistan for a family function, there is an attempt to forcefully marry Shafilea to a boy there, but Shafilea refuses to marry for this reason, and she consumes fennel. After that, her health deteriorates, and her marriage does not happen either. When Shafilea returns to Britain, her family members here also insist on arranging her marriage with a boy of their choice. But when Shafilea repeatedly refuses this marriage, her father gets angry, and at first beats Shafilea in anger and then covers her face with a polythene bag, and then due to suffocation, Shafia Ahmad dies here. But immediately after this disclosure, Alicia Ahmed becomes a government witness in the case. In exchange, she is assured a minimum sentence in the theft case. However, based on Alicia's statement on September 2, 2010, Farzana and Iftikhar are arrested, and then a case of their own daughter's murder is pursued against them. Both of them remain in jail for several months after the arrest. However, nearly a year later, on September 15, 2011, they are granted bail by the Manchester Crown Court. In the further investigation, the police gather some crucial evidence, and based on that evidence, the trial of this case begins in the Chester Crown Court on May 21, 2012. Initially, Farzana and Iftikhar continue to deny their involvement in their daughter's murder, but when Farzana begins to suspect that she is being framed for her own daughter's murder, she finally accepts in court on July 9, 2012, that Shafilea Ahmed's murder was not committed by anyone else, but by Iftikhar Ahmed himself. In her statement, Farzana also reveals that she tried to stop Iftikhar, but instead, Iftikhar beat and threatened her family, saying, "If any of you ever talk about this to anyone, your fate will be just like Shafilea's." Now, 2 witnesses had testified against Iftikhar Ahmed. Besides, the police who gather evidence also indicate that it was Iftikhar Ahmed who murdered Shafilea, then threw her body far into the jungle. However, a natural disaster struck that area, and with the floodwaters, Shafilea's body drifted and reached the riverbank on its own. After a lengthy trial in August 2012, Farzana and Iftikhar are found guilty of murdering their own daughter and disposing of her body. After the murder, they are then sentenced to 25 years each. It is also proven in court that this was an honor killing. Following this verdict, every year on July 14th, Shafilea Ahmed's birthday, the National Day of Memory for Victims of Honor Killings, is observed in her memory. So with this, the case of Shafilea Ahmed comes to a close. However, perhaps nature also desired that Shafilea Ahmed receive justice and her killers be punished. Therefore, albeit late, Shafilea's parents, her murderers, are also sentenced.
Have you heard the story about the nuclear power plant employee from Springfield who is having problems with his wife? No, we're not talking about Homer Simpson. We're talking about this guy. Sounds legit, right? Wrong. What you heard just now was the voice of an extremely talented liar. In 1995, Mark Winger, a nuclear power plant technician in Springfield, Illinois, murdered his wife by beating her to death with a hammer. In an even darker twist to the story, he framed someone else for the murder, married their child's nanny shortly afterwards, and got away with murder for nearly 4 years. So how did he do it? Hi, and welcome to Mysterious 7. I'm Michael, and today I'm going to take you guys through another case with the most insane twists you've ever heard. In June of 1995, it seemed like life couldn't possibly get any better for Mark and Donna Winger. The nuclear technician and his wife had been happily married for several years, and they had just adopted a newborn baby girl named Bailey. Donna was the oldest of 3 sisters in what they described as an incredibly close-knit family. The Dreschers grew to love Mark too. He was smart, Jewish. He was attractive and he was fun, Donna's sister Jenny Levin told the media. Donna just felt like she had found her person. After Mark and Donna Winger were married in 1989, he was offered a job, and the newlyweds settled in Springfield, Illinois. We always joked about the fact when one sister marries, that husband marries 3 sisters, Levin said. We shared our lives with Mark. Donna was working as an operating room technician and Mark was a nuclear engineer. Donna couldn't have been happier. The only thing she would have liked to was to have a child, her stepfather, Ira Drescher, said. Donna's mother, Sarah Jane Drescher, said her daughter was overwhelmed when she learned that she could not get pregnant. But then one day while working at the hospital, a doctor told Donna that a teenager was looking to put her baby up for adoption. Adopting the child was an easy decision for her. She looked at me with tears when she said, "Michelle, I knew it the minute they put the baby into my arms. She has always been mine," Donna's sister Michelle Hansen said. The Wingers welcomed baby Bailey into their home on June 1st, 1995. Donna's family said the couple loved their new roles as parents. They seemed to have all the makings of a long and happy life together. Mark was just as excited to become a dad as Donna was to become a mom, Hansen said. Donna had met the woman who would eventually become her best friend, Deanne Schultz, at the hospital. And with the arrival of Bailey, the two bonded over motherhood. But then everything turned dark. In August 1995, Donna took baby Bailey on a trip to Hollywood, Florida, to visit Donna's family. Her mother had just dropped the 2 of them off at the airport and hired a driver to pick them up in St. Louis, Missouri, and drive them back to Springfield. So after the visit, the 2 flew into St. Louis Airport and hopped in a cab driven by Roger Harrington with a 2-hour ride back to Springfield. During the course of the drive, Harrington reportedly began flirting with Donna and talking about drugs and orgies. Detective Charlie Cox, a police officer who investigated Donna's death, later said, "This gentleman started opening up to Donna about issues he was having. He had a voice in his head named Dom. Dom would tell him to do bad things. Recently, Dom was telling him to hurt people." After Donna safely arrived home with Bailey, she called the transit company to make a formal complaint about Harrington's behavior, and the driver was suspended. Cox later said that the driver started flirting with Donna, telling her he liked older women and even invited her to attend what he described as one of his sex parties. Donna had told her family that the ride was terrifying because he was driving erratically at 75 miles per hour. After the harrowing ride, Donna had been the victim of some strange phone calls, Weinhoft said. The family had believed that the driver had been stalking her and was a danger. Donna called the limousine company to file a complaint, and Harrington was suspended. Mark argued his wife to write down the story in case they might need it. Police later found the note describing Donna's harrowing ride in her handwriting at the crime scene. Donna also told Mark about the experience, and though he played a part of the supportive husband and helped her file the complaint, it turned out that he had ulterior motives for doing so. Just days later, Mark invited Harrington to their home, perhaps under the pretense of helping him get his job back. On the 29th of August 1995, the cab driver wrote Mark's name, address, and the time on a scrap of paper in his car, drove to the Wingers' home, walked inside with a coffee cup and a pack of cigarettes, and was shot twice in the head. Mark Winger then called 911 and told the dispatcher he'd just shot a man who was killing his wife. He informed police that he'd been walking on the treadmill in the basement when he heard a commotion upstairs. He grabbed his gun, went to investigate, and found Harrington swinging a hammer at Donna. In an effort to defend his wife, he'd shot the man twice. Police arrived on the scene to find that both Donna and Harrington still had a weak pulse. Mark was in a back bedroom rolling back and forth in total shock. When former Springfield Police Detective Charlie Cox arrived at the Wingers' home, he remembered they could see the victims from the front door. Donna was clinging to life, said Sangamon County Assistant State Attorney Steve Weinholt. She had been hit no less than 7 times in the head with a hammer. The second victim, a white man, had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head, but still had a pulse when police arrived, said Weinholt. It was quite chaotic, Cox said. I knew that they were probably going to be transporting the victim soon, so I wanted to try and get identification on the male suspect. Cox found the man's wallet and was able to identify him as Roger Harrington. Police recovered a bloody hammer near the 2 bodies and found Mark's .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun, a yellow mug, and a pack of cigarettes on the same dining table. They also noticed that Harrington's car had been parked against traffic, facing the wrong direction. At the crime scene, Cox said Mark was very upset and very emotional, and that he repeatedly asked who the man he'd killed was. Cox avoided identifying Harrington and tried to calm Mark down. As police combed through the scene, Mark asked police if the intruder's name was Roger. Cox confirmed that it was. Mark was shocked, and he said, "Oh my gosh, that's the man who's been harassing my wife this week," Cox said. Cox, who was familiar with Harrington after he'd lived in a trailer park owned by Cox, believed Harrington might have snapped. "I knew him as a very volatile type subject. He and his wife rented a trailer for me," Cox said. "Knowing what I knew about Mr. Harrington in the past, how quick he was to anger, I thought that very well he could have gone over there to try to get his job back. There's a hammer laying right there on the table. He picks it up and goes into a rage, then the husband shoots the bad guy." Tragically, both victims succumbed to their injuries. After learning about Donna's previous run-in with Harrington and listening to Mark's version of events, the police closed the case within days, listing Roger Harrington as the culprit. Because once police examined the scene and listened to Mark's story, detectives concluded that he had acted in self-defense. The case was closed in about 48 hours, Weinholt said. But Harrington's family insisted from the beginning that their son was harmless. "He was no troublemaker. He was a good kid. He wouldn't even strike at anybody," his mother, Helen Harrington, said. "I don't think he would hurt anybody, and I don't think he was crazy." So it seemed like Mark Winger was going to get away with murder. Donna's mother spoke to the media about the evening, and the family received the news of her daughter's murder. "It was 4 a.m, and I said, 'Jenny, it's Mom. Something terrible has happened,' Sarah Jane Drescher said of her call to Levin. We sat there in my room, just crying at this unimaginable loss, Levin said. In the following months, Donna's mother and sister took turns traveling to Illinois to help take care of Bailey. I loved Mark because he loved Donna, and that's what was important to me, Sarah Jane Drescher said. But I had to be very careful because I did not want to ruin my relationship with him, because I did not want to ruin my relationship with the baby. I wanted to be a grandma, and Bailey made me a grandma. Mark was now a single father raising his infant daughter on his own. Donna's family initially flew to Illinois to help out, but they couldn't stay, and they suggested Mark hire a nanny. In January 1996, he met 23-year-old Rebecca Simic, who was searching for a nanny job in the area. Rebecca told reporters, "It just felt like Bailey was the one that really needed me the most. She had been through so much already at the age of 3 months." Rebecca was wonderful with Bailey, and even Donna's family agreed that she was like an angel sent to help Mark. While she felt a little uncomfortable in the house, where 2 people had died violently, she was dedicated to giving Bailey a good childhood despite the trauma of losing her mother. "I didn't want to like Rebecca, but it was hard not to like her," Levin said. "Seeing her with Bailey, there was really nothing bad we could say about her." Meanwhile, Rebecca's role at Mark's home had begun to evolve. When you live with someone and you're taking care of a child together, it's very easy to kind of play house. Rebecca said later on. Rebecca told the media that she was blown away by what the infant had been through in such a short time. "Mark made me feel like I was like an angel sent to him from God or Donna, and it was my purpose to make this family whole again," Rebecca said. She lost 2 mothers by the time she was 3 months old, and she was so smiley, Rebecca said. "I wanted to get in there and say, I'm going to help and I'm going to make this little girl's life better." Mark helped Rebecca feel at ease in her new role. After a few months, the two found themselves sharing conversation and a glass of wine at the end of a long day. And then one thing led to another as their relationship turned intimate. Within the year, Rebecca was pregnant with Mark's child. The couple eloped in Hawaii in October 1996, just 14 months after Donna's death. "I remember asking him how he could move on so quickly," Rebecca later recalled. "And he explained to me that when you have a good marriage, it's natural for you to just want that again." Rebecca said Mark had told her he wasn't able to have children, so she said she was very surprised when she found out she was pregnant with his child only months after moving in. "Obviously, I wasn't careful. It was just kind of a shock," she said. Mark, on the other hand, was thrilled, Rebecca recalled. "It felt like it was a victory to him," she said. "Mark put pressure on me to marry him and have children with him." Rebecca said that Mark, who was Jewish when they met, even started going to church with her. She said he told her they could raise a family in a Christian home. "I would be honored to be your husband and blessed if you were my wife," Mark wrote in a letter to Rebecca. Mark's rabbi, Michael Datz, asked him about his change in faith, and he said that Mark explained, "Judaism is just too difficult and unforgiving." Rabbi Datz didn't understand, asking, "Mark, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you need forgiveness for?" He said Mark didn't respond. But then it seemed like Mark was trying almost a little too hard to leave the past behind. 16 months after his wife's death, Mark told Sarah Jane Drescher that he was going to sell the house where her daughter Donna had died and buy another one just outside of town. He and Rebecca had started a family of their own, and he started cutting ties with Donna's parents. "I received a letter from Mark one day saying to me I could not be called grandma," Sarah Jane Drescher said. "I wrote him back and I begged him, please let her call me grandma. And he said, I'm sorry, there's no way I am going to allow her to call you grandma, and that's the way it is." Sarah said she mourned that loss for a long time. Bailey Simic, now 25, told reporters that her grandmother and grandfather, Ira Drescher, would send a birthday card to her every year. "I always remember asking my mom, 'Who's Sarah Jane and Ira?' she said. My mom would always explain, like, 'Those are Donna's parents, and they just want to let you know that, like, they love you and that they remember you.'" Eventually, Mark sold the house where Donna had died and moved with his new wife to the suburbs outside of Springfield. Things seemed great on the surface. They had 3 children together, and Rebecca raised Bailey as her daughter. Though chaotic, their life seemed almost perfect. Mark was a loving partner and a very involved father. That would all change quite soon. One day in early 1909, when Mark was feeling ill, Rebecca took him to the emergency room in the hospital where Donna had worked before her death. There they saw Donna's best friend and co-worker, Deanne Schultz. She seemed upset to see Mark, and Rebecca remembered that Deanne had acted strangely when she first came on Bailey's nanny. as if she were anxious to stay involved in Bailey's life. After they returned home, Mark commented that that may not be the last they heard from Deanne. He was right. In February 1999, Deanne dropped a bombshell on the police, revealing that she and Mark had been having an affair before Donna's death. She said that at one point, he'd remarked to her that things would be easier for them if Donna was dead. She told them that after Donna's fateful ride with Roger Harrington, Mark said that he needed to get that driver to the house. "All you'd need to do is find the body," he told her. Deanne never thought Mark was serious, but when Donna turned up dead soon after, she knew he had done it. Mark had threatened her not to tell anyone about the things he'd said, and she'd attempted suicide several times while struggling with her guilt. After seeing him in the hospital, she decided she couldn't keep quiet any longer. After hearing Deanne's story, police decided to take a closer look at the evidence from the day of the murders. The more they thought about what they'd once assumed was an open and shut case, the more questions they had. Why were there no signs of forced entry into the Winger home that August day? Why would Roger Harrington bring his cup of coffee and cigarettes into the house with him if he'd planned to attack Donna? And why would he use the Winger's hammer as a weapon when he had a tire iron and a knife in his car? At that point, investigators came upon 3 never-before-seen Polaroid photos taken the day of the murders. They'd been with the evidence collected in a civil suit Mark had filed against the transportation company that had employed Harrington. The position of the bodies in the photos showed that Mark's version of events were not possible. Mark Winger had stated that Roger Harrington was kneeling right next to Donna Winger's head and he was beating her with a hammer, Weinhoft explained. He stated that he shot him and that the man fell backward so that his feet remained near Donna's head. In reality, the Polaroid photographs show the exact opposite. Blood spatter experts agreed. Cox later told the media, "I was ashamed of the way the investigation went. I heard Roger Harrington's family. I ran his name through hell for no reason. I mean, he was an innocent victim. It had become clear that Mark was the real murderer behind the scenes the whole time." Rebecca Simic was left to make sense of the tragedy. She had no idea what Mark was capable of, and afterward, she moved her 4 children out of Springfield to feel safer. While Mark had tried to keep Bailey away from Donna's family, Rebecca encouraged them to be reunited. "We'd been hurt a lot by the same person," Rebecca said, "but it didn't break us." Donna's family and Rebecca spoke to reporters about the horrific realization that Mark was a manipulative killer hiding behind the mask of a brilliant engineer and a kind, loving husband and father. In December 1999, more than 4 years after the murders, the Springfield State Journal-Register ran an article based on allegations in the civil lawsuit that Mark had arranged the murder himself and killed both his wife and Harrington. The allegations were based on a blood spatter expert hired by BART Transportation in the case after the arrest of their employee Harrington. "Everything came to a head. It changed everything," Rebecca said of the article. "I mean, it went from Mark as the hero who was defending his wife, this noble stand-up guy that every man wanted to pat on the back, to a manipulative, deviant murderer." As the detectives continued their reinvestigation, they learned that Harrington's roommate, Susan Collins, had initially told police that someone asked to meet with Harrington on the day of the murders and that she'd seen Harrington on the phone arranging that meeting. Inside Harrington's car, they found a note written on a bank deposit slip with Mark's name, his address, and the time to be there. Roger Harrington was not an intruder, but rather he was lured into that home by Mark Winger, Weinhoft said. Deanne Schultz's cooperation with police and evidence that raised questions about Mark's story prompted the voluntary dismissal of the civil suit against BART Transportation. "I didn't see it coming," Rebecca said. "I didn't know that this whole investigation was brewing. I never thought the whole time that they thought my husband was a diabolical murderer." A warrant was issued for Mark's arrest, and he was taken into custody while at work. "I had made plans to go to McDonald's Playland," Rebecca recalled. "We were there and I got a phone call, and it was Mark's secretary, and she told me that Mark had just been arrested. I was just sick. Like my whole body kind of went numb, and I just couldn't believe it. I was shaking so badly, and I just remembered feeling so scared. I felt that I owed it to him and to my kids to just stand by him," she said. Hanson, Donna's sister, said she didn't feel relieved following Mark's arrest. "I still wanted to believe he was innocent," she said. "Here's this person that I know in handcuffs, And what's going to happen? Bailey was just 6 years old at the time of Mark's arrest. She said no longer having her father home was scary. I just remember everyone just trying to remain calm and kind of, at the time, being like, Dad's just going away for a while and that he'll be back soon, she said. But that was no longer possible. On August 23, 2001, Mark Winger was indicted for the murders of Donna Winger and Roger Harrington. At the trial in May 2002, a visibly shaky Deanne testified against Mark. The court granted her immunity in exchange for her testimony, though there was no evidence linking her to anything other than keeping Mark's terrible secret. Mark was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. One of the key points the prosecution had to prove was that Harrington had gone to the house to meet with the Wingers, not to commit a murder. They presented the cigarettes and coffee mug that he'd brought inside, as well as the weapons he'd left in his car and the note with Mark's name and address. Mark's attorney argued that Harrington was mentally ill, that he behaved erratically, and that these traits indicated he was capable of murder. When prosecutors presented the Polaroids showing the position of the bodies before they were removed from the scene, Mark's attorney argued throughout the trial that first responders could have moved the bodies. It's our belief that Roger comes to the house, he's allowed into the home, now retired Detective Jim Graham said. There were no signs of forced entry, and he was executed at that time. Hearing the gunshot, Donna Winger then comes from the bathroom to investigate. He then beats his wife to death with a hammer. Mark then calls 911. In the 911 call, someone can be heard moaning in the background. When Mark tells the operator he can hear his baby crying and hangs up. He had told the operator there was a bullet in Harrington's head, but when police arrived, Harrington had been shot twice. Deanne also gave damning testimony at the trial, saying that Mark told her it would be easier if Donna just died. I thought it was crazy talk, she said during her cross-examination. After a chance meeting years later, Deanne testified that she confronted Mark in the hopes of gathering information and asked him how he lived with himself, and that he'd replied that he had found Jesus Christ and was forgiven. She said he warned her that if she ever said anything, they would both be in trouble. I didn't think that anybody would believe her, Rebecca said. I just thought if Mark truly did that, she would have come forward right away. Mark's defense argued that Deanne was emotionally unstable and just a woman who had been scorned. Deanne Schultz's testimony was able to demonstrate that in reality, Mark was obviously unhappy, unfaithful, and had specifically talked about wanting to kill his wife, Weinhoft said. Schultz was granted immunity for her testimony, he added. There was no direct evidence that directly linked Deanne to actively participating in this crime. In the end, she was such a valuable witness as it relates to presenting the motive. After a trial that lasted 3 weeks, the jury found Mark Winger guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Rebecca said she believed he would be going home with them. After the verdict, she said the words guilty rang through her head and that she wanted the earth to open up and swallow me. Sarah Jane Drescher and her daughters, Donna's sisters, were with her when they heard the verdict. The 3 of us just embraced and cried, she said. And the story gets even more twisted, because 4 years later, Mark was also sentenced to an additional 35 years in prison when he tried to hire a hitman to kill Deanne or testifying against him. He even attempted to put out a hit against a childhood friend who had refused to pay his bail. Helen Harrington was relieved and grateful that her son had been vindicated of Donna's murder. We knew that Roger was innocent, and it finally got proven, she said. He was branded a murderer at the time, but then all this came to an end. The police also had to come to terms with the faulty initial investigation. I was ashamed of the way the investigation went, Cox said. I heard Roger Harrington's family. I ran his name through hell for no reason. I mean, he was an innocent victim. The police department had too hastily closed the case and turned a blind eye to some red flags, and to right such a wrong, it felt great, Bram added. But Rebecca said there wasn't any closure for her or her family. When we lose someone, we gather. We have a funeral, Rebecca shared. But when someone goes to prison, well, what do? You're just kind of left with this emptiness and this hole that you can't really have closure with that. It wasn't just him being sentenced to life, she said. We were sentenced to a life of a father in prison. Bailey Simic says she missed having her father around while growing up. It was really hard being in school, seeing all the other kids had their dads and that relationship, she said. And now suddenly, I couldn't just go to my dad's room or have him pick us up from school or anything like that. Ben Simic was only a year old when his dad went to prison. I can look at the pictures and look at myself and say, that kid has no idea. He was way too young to know anything that was going on, he said. Rebecca had to move out of Springfield with her kids, and the home that she'd bought with Mark was foreclosed. She had been a stay-at-home mom for 7 years, so she had no option but to file for bankruptcy. I didn't have anything to give my kids. Everything had been taken away. All I had was love, she said. Rebecca never remarried as far as we know. She raised all 4 of the children on her own. And Bailey has since reunited with Donna's family. It was so incredible to see that there's this whole big family that loves me, and Sarah Jane still has my baby picture on her kitchen counter with all of her other grandkids, even though we've been gone for so long, she said. We've been hurt a lot by the same person, but it didn't break us, Rebecca said. Although Sarah Jane Drescher says there will never be closure for the murder of her daughter, the family has worked together to set up Donna's Fund, which is a part of Women in Distress, an organization that works to provide shelter for women trying to escape abuse. I think her legacy will live on through people that we help, Levin said, and through the beautiful memories that we have of her. So what do you think of this crazy, twisted case of murder uncovered? Would Mark Winger still be walking scot-free today if his former lover, Deanne Schultz, hadn't developed a guilty conscience? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. And don't forget to like, share, and hit the subscribe for more in-depth coverage of some of the most manipulative murders of all time. Stay safe, friends. Until next time. In the quiet, mundane life sometimes lie the most extraordinary and harrowing stories. The name of Velma Barfield forever changed the narrative of crime and punishment in the United States. Her life story reads like a tragedy that challenges our perception of evil. Known to many as the death row grandma, she became the first woman executed by lethal injection in the United States, the first woman to be executed after the death penalty's reinstatement in 1976, and also the first woman executed since 1962. But how did a wife, mother, and grandmother, once cherished and loved by those who knew her, transform into one of the most notorious figures in criminal history? Born in a time of economic despair, in the shadow of the Great Depression, Velma Margie Barfield came into the world on October 29, 1932, in Eastover, North Carolina, but was raised near Fayetteville. The second of 9 children, she witnessed a constant battle against poverty from the early age. In rural North Carolina, where life was governed by the rising and setting of the sun, Velma's family toiled on their small tobacco and cotton farm. Velma's father, Murphy Bullard, was a man worn down by the hardships of farm life. His temper was as volatile as the weather that dictated their fortunes. Velma claimed he was physically and sexually abusive to her and her sisters. However, other relatives disputed this. Velma's mother, Lily Bullard, bore the brunt of her husband's frustrations. In their world, love was a luxury they could hardly afford, leaving Velma and her siblings to navigate a childhood marked by emotional absence and the ever-present threat of violence. At a young age, Velma observed the financial differences between herself and her peers. That's when her first criminal activity started. She initially took small amounts of cash from her father to buy little things that she saw her classmates enjoying. Her petty thefts escalated to taking $80 from an elderly neighbor. When her father discovered that, he beat her severely, and Velma stopped stealing for the remainder of her childhood. Raised in a Christian household, young Velma found solace in the pages of her Bible, clinging to faith in the turmoil of her home life. This early introduction to religion was a constant amidst chaos. Yet, as she transitioned to adolescence, the psychological scars left by her upbringing would shape the woman she would later become. The world around was convulsed by World War II. The war, though distant, exacerbated the hardships faced by her family and deepened the fractures within. Velma, like many of her generation, was forced to grow up quickly. Her dreams and aspirations were often overshadowed by the pressing needs of survival and duty to family. Yet it was during this time that her resilience and tenacity began to shine through, qualities that would define her in both commendable and tragic ways. As Velma stepped into early adulthood, her desire for a life beyond the confines of her home grew stronger. she dreamed of escape. At the age of 17, she dropped out of school. The search for love and stability led Velma into the arms of Thomas Burke, a union that promised freedom, but instead brought new hardships. By 19, she had 2 children, a son, Ron, and a daughter, Kim. The family lived happily in Parkton, North Carolina, for over 15 years. Velma's life with Thomas seemed a hard-earned escape from the poverty and violence of her childhood. Everything changed in 1965 when Thomas got into a serious car crash and suffered head injuries. To cope with the intense pain and headaches caused by his injuries, he became a heavy drinker and drug user. His struggle with alcohol mirrored the demons of Velma's father, reigniting the traumas of her past. The cycle of abuse and neglect she vowed never to repeat began to encroach upon her own family. It was during these turbulent years that Velma's resilience was put to the ultimate test. The pressures of an unhappy marriage, the responsibilities of motherhood, and the patterns of her past weighed heavily on her soul. Velma started a job at a textile factory, but soon had to quit due to health problems. She underwent an urgent hysterectomy, which left her feeling insecure about her femininity. After the surgery, she suffered from debilitating back pain and turned to prescription drugs. What began as a means to cope soon spiraled into addiction that eroded her judgment and set the stage for the tragedies to come. Her journey was not a plunge, but a gradual descent, each step marked by an increasing desperation to maintain the illusion of control. On April 4, 1969, Velma had a fierce argument with her husband. Later that day, when she and the children were away, the house caught fire. Thomas, who remained inside, died from smoke inhalation, and the house was burned to the ground. Velma and the kids moved in with her parents. A few months after her husband's death, Velma started dating a widower, Jennings Barfield. They married in August 1970. One day, the couple had an argument, after which Jennings became mysteriously ill. On March 21, 1971, he died of a heart attack. Velma moved into her parents' home again. Soon after that, her father died of lung cancer. In the summer of 1974, her mother suffered severe stomach pain and was taken to the hospital. As she got better, she returned home. In August 1974, a man Velma was dating died in a car accident. On December 30th of the same year, her mother was taken to the hospital again with similar symptoms of a severe stomach illness. Doctors couldn't help her this time, nor could they diagnose her illness, and she died after 2 hours. No autopsy was performed. As mysterious deaths around Velma continued, her son, Ronnie Burke, said, "It's the saddest thing, but it seems like everybody my mother ever gets close to dies. How could the good Lord allow this to happen to a faithful Christian like Velma Barfield?" The financial strain of her addiction led to another unethical decision, forging checks to sustain her growing needs. But deceit has its price, and the trust within the community began to fray. Velma found herself trapped in a web of her own making. In 1975, she was convicted of 7 counts of writing bad checks and sentenced to 6 months in prison. However, she was released after serving 3 months. Upon her release in 1976, Velma took a job as a caretaker for the elderly. Initially, she worked for 94-year-old Montgomery Edwards and his 84-year-old wife Dolly in Lumberton, North Carolina. Montgomery fell ill and died on January 29, 1977. A few weeks later, in February, Dolly developed symptoms of a stomach illness similar to those of Velma's mother and died on March 1st. Velma then started looking after 76-year-old Record Lee, who had broken her leg. On June 4, 1977, Lee's husband, John Henry, began to suffer severe pains in his stomach and chest. Doctors diagnosed his condition as a severe stomach virus. He died later that month. Later, in 1977, Velma moved in with her boyfriend Roland Stewart Taylor, a relative of Dolly Edwards. He was a widower and tobacco farmer. One day, they were attending a Pentecostal revival meeting in Cumberland County. Suddenly, Stewart complained of severe stomach pain. He was taken to the hospital, where he died after a few days. The search for truth begins in the quietest of ways. A question, a doubt, a pressing need for answers. Suspicion grew in the hearts of those who had watched Stewart's health decline under mysterious circumstances. It was their persistence that first brought the authorities to Velma's doorstep. initiating a chain of events that would lead to shocking revelations. An autopsy was ordered. The investigation into Stuart Taylor's death was methodical. Each test, each interview, each piece of evidence added another layer of suspicion around Velma. In the world of criminal investigations, breakthroughs often come with a faint clue, a moment of intuition, a connection previously unseen. For the team pursuing justice for Stuart Taylor and the other victims, it came in the form of forensic evidence. Arsenic became the linchpin in unraveling the mystery, traces of which were found in Stuart's system. Before the autopsy results were declared, Lumberton police received an anonymous phone call, reportedly from Velma's sister, who said that Velma had poisoned Taylor and others. Subsequently, Velma was arrested on charges of murdering Stuart Taylor. After her arrest, the body of Jennings Barfield was exhumed, and traces of arsenic were found. The unraveling of Velma's carefully constructed lies began. The art of interrogation is delicate, a push and pull between investigator and suspect. Each question a probe into the darkest corners of the human heart. For Velma, the questions posed by her interrogators mirrored the ones she had long avoided within herself. It was in this room, under the weight of evidence and the scrutiny of the law, that the walls she had built to separate her actions from her conscience could no longer hold as the truth clawed its way to the surface. In search of solace, Velma turned to a spiritual advisor. It was in this desperate hope for redemption that she found the strength to confront her past. For her, the path to confession was a journey back to her soul. With a voice tinged with regret, Velma began to speak. A torrent of truths, long dammed by fear, shame, and denial, flowed forth. Her confession became a source of deep, lasting pain for her own family, who were unwittingly caught in her web of deceit. The woman they loved and the horrible crimes she committed were now inseparably linked, challenging their notions of forgiveness and the very foundations of their understanding of right and wrong. She confessed to poisoning Montgomery and Dolly Edwards, John Henry Lee, her mother Lillian, and her boyfriend Stuart Taylor. Despite the fact that arsenic was found in Jennings Barfield's body, Velma denied killing him. The motive for the murders was stealing money from her victims to support her clandestine addiction to prescription drugs. She had also taken out a loan in her mother's name. Each of her tragic choices, made under the influence of pain, had a devastating impact on her destiny and the people around her. Faced with the threat of exposure, Velma took a step that irrevocably altered the course of her life. The path from one crime to another can often be a slippery slope. She found herself repeating the unthinkable. Every time, Velma went to her victims' funerals and seemed to sincerely mourn their loss. The burden of her secret pushed her further into isolation. Yet, the resilient human psyche, adept at self-preservation, often takes refuge in justification to shield itself from the unbearable truth and finds ways to rationalize even the darkest deeds. Every time Velma stole money from her victims, then poisoned them as they got suspicious. To the outside world, she remained a devout churchgoer, a seemingly caring nurse, and a loving family member. But her moral compass, once guided by faith, now veered into a realm of denial, caught in a constant struggle between the remnants of her conscience and the overwhelming desire to escape the consequences of her actions. She was forging checks on her boyfriend Stuart Taylor's account. Presumably, he discovered that. So she mixed an arsenic-based rat poison into his beer and tea, determined to maintain her secret at any cost. At the trial, Velma's defense pleaded insanity, but this was not accepted. She appeared cold and uncaring. She laughed at the prosecutor and even gave the district attorney a round of applause after his closing speech. The prosecution painted a picture of Velma not as the church-going grandmother she purported to be, but as a calculating murderer driven by darkness. She was the architect of her own fate, and her actions deserved the utmost penalty. The defense, in turn, sought to humanize her, portraying her not as a monster, but as a troubled soul ensnared by addiction, abuse, and circumstances beyond her control, highlighting her mental health struggles as a mitigating factor in her crimes. In the world of law and order, the truth is often more complex than it appears, inseparable from human emotions. Although she eventually confessed to 6 murders, She was convicted only of the first-degree murder of Stuart Taylor in December 1978. The trial jury found aggravating circumstances and sentenced her to death. For the victims' families, the verdict was an acknowledgement of their irreplaceable loss. A designated holding area for female death row prisoners did not exist at the time, and Velma was the only female death row inmate in North Carolina. So, she was imprisoned at Central Prison in Raleigh, in an area for escape-prone prisoners and prisoners with mental illnesses. Subsequently, a unit for female death row inmates was established at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women. While on death row, Velma was off the drugs and expressed remorse for the years that the pills had blurred her judgment and destroyed her moral compass. In the solitude of her cell, she began the arduous process of confronting her past. The nights were long, the faces of her victims haunted her dreams, and the silence served as a backdrop for her thoughts and regrets. It was during these moments of reflection that Velma faced the full magnitude of her actions, the lives she had taken, and the pain she had caused. Her conversations with the prison chaplain were not just about seeking forgiveness from a higher power, but about understanding the nature of atonement and the painstaking process of forgiving oneself. In jail, Velma confessed that she had never been a true Christian. Her Christianity had been a matter of form and gesture. Then, finally, while waiting for her trial, she genuinely opened her heart to Jesus and received forgiveness and salvation. She wrote in her autobiography, "All my life I was weighted down by my sins because I couldn't do better. It never occurred to me that Jesus really did pay the price, that Jesus alone bore the extreme punishment, death, for my sins, not just for my good neighbors. And even more glorious, Jesus is willing to be my friend even now. I can talk to him and he will listen." She became a devout Christian and spent her 6 final years ministering to other inmates. Velma, in her own way, became a source of support to them. Her involvement in spiritual activities offered her a sense of community and belonging that had eluded her for much of her life. Her extensive participation in the Christian community led to a campaign to have her sentence commuted from death to life imprisonment. She wrote letters to Governor Jim Hunt telling him that her born-again Christian faith should be considered as a mitigating factor. She received support from many Christians across the United States, including evangelists Billy and Ruth Graham. Ruth kept in touch with Velma by mail. Her victims' families, however, considered Velma's conversion a fraud and a ploy to save her life. To them, she was a woman who had killed their loved ones. Velma remained a loving mother and a caring grandmother. She enjoyed family visits every weekend and spent time with her children and grandchildren. Her new attorney, Richard Burr, said about her, "The person I saw was kind, sensitive, and loving. There was no hidden agenda with Velma. Whenever you were with her, she was who she was. From what I understand, that's how she lived her life in prison. So, from the very beginning, I believed that when she committed those crimes, it was not the Velma Barfield mentally and emotionally that I was seeing and getting to know." Burr believed that Velma's pre-trial evaluations were inadequate, so he turned to psychiatrist Selwyn Rose. Dr. Rose evaluated Velma in 1980 and testified in the state court. He said that she suffered from 3 disorders: a multiple prescription drug abuse disorder, an underlying personality disorder, and depression. However, Dr. Rose never felt as if he had put together a complete picture of Velma. As Burr had no license to practice in North Carolina, he now assisted Velma's new lawyer, Jimmy Little. As time was running out, Velma's son, Ronnie Burke, asked her if she had killed his father. She replied, "I'm sure I probably did." She couldn't remember clearly, but she believed that she had left a cigarette or a match in the bed and then closed the door, leaving her drunk husband to sleep in their burning house. She also admitted to the pastor who helped her write Woman on Death Row that she had murdered Jennings Barfield. Velma said she was glad that this was finally over because she was afraid that she was going to poison her grandchildren. She didn't know why she did it, but she did it, and it was not something she could stop. North Carolina's governor refused Velma's request for clemency and said that her victims had been literally tortured to death. Additionally, an appeal was made based on testimony from a psychiatry professor who asserted that she suffered from dissociative identity disorder. Professor Dorothy Lewis, professor of psychiatry at New York University School of Medicine and an expert in violent behavior, picked up patterns of manic episodes in Velma's earlier life, associated with the development of a manic-depressive disorder. She said she had talked to Velma's other personality, Billy, who told her Velma had been a victim of sexual abuse and that he, Billy, had killed her abusers. The judge responded to this by saying, "One of them did it. I don't care which one." Velma's final appeal was filed on October 30th, 1984, in the North Carolina Supreme Court, based on her being incompetent at her original trial due to her drug addiction. This appeal was denied in federal court. She told her attorney, Jimmy Little, to drop all appeals the day before she was executed, explaining that she wanted to die with as much dignity as the state of North Carolina will allow. Her last hours were spent in reflection and prayer, seeking comfort in her faith. As she was preparing for death, the famous pastor Billy Graham told her over the phone, "Velma, in a way I envy you because you're going to get to heaven before I do." Velma was executed on November 2nd, 1984, at Central Prison in Raleigh. She released a statement before her execution. "I want to say that I am sorry for all the hurt that I have caused. I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain, all the families connected, and I am sorry, and I want to thank everybody who has been supporting me all these 6 years. I want to thank my family for standing with me through all this, and my attorneys and all the support to me, everybody, the people with the prison department. I appreciate everything, their kindness and everything that they have shown me during these 6 years." As her last meal, she chose a bag of cheese doodles and a Coca-Cola. She received final visits from her family members and friends. She wasn't scared and told one of them, "When I go into that gas chamber at 2 a.m., it's my gateway to heaven." She was wearing pink pajamas for the execution. A stethoscope and heart monitor were taped to her chest. The wheeled gurney was brought to her cell, and she was fastened to it with straps across her body and legs. Then she was wheeled into the execution chamber shortly before 2 a.m. Crowds of pro- and anti-death penalty demonstrators gathered outside the prison. Some of the protesters accused Governor Hunt of refusing to show mercy and compassion, arguing that she could lead a life of value behind bars and help other prisoners. Richard Burr said, "Politics and death have been mixed up in this case." Inmates were banging rhythmically on the windows of their cells, waiting for the execution. About 80 people who were in favor of capital punishment cheered and applauded. The execution was carried out by 3 volunteers. One of the intravenous lines was a dummy, so that none of the volunteers knew which of them actually administered the lethal dose. Velma was declared dead at 2:15 a.m., 15 minutes after being administered the injection of procuronium bromide. Observers at the execution reported that she passed away peacefully, with no apparent suffering or pain. About 300 opponents of the death penalty stood in silent vigil, carrying candles that were extinguished as the moment of the execution passed. At 2:25 a.m., Velma's body was taken to a medical school by an ambulance. She had requested that her organs be used for transplantation. She was buried in a small North Carolina cemetery near her first husband, Thomas Burke. She was 52 years old. Singer-songwriter Jonathan Byrd, the grandson of Jennings Barfield and his first wife, wrote a song about Velma. Located in Lee County, Auburn is the largest city in eastern Alabama. It's also Alabama's fastest-growing metropolitan area and the 19th fastest-growing metro area in the United States since 1990. Unofficially nicknamed the loveliest village on the plains, Auburn is a melting pot for cultures with its southern hospitality. This historic college town is the home to Auburn University, one of the most recognized public universities in the nation. Today's story involves a former student of this university, Lori Slasinski. Lori Ann Slasinski was born to parents Casey and Arlene Slasinski on September 21st, 1981. Gifted with blue eyes and blonde hair, Lori was always adored by her parents and her big brother Paul. The family was originally from New York State, but later moved south to the rural Alabama farm country near the town of Auburn when Lori was just 13 years old. As a country girl being raised with animals, Lori was an avid animal lover. According to her friends, Lori was absolutely beautiful. She loved spending time with friends, watching movies, riding her bicycle, and playing video games. In addition to all that fun, she was also very studious and her family tried to support her as much as they could. After finishing high school, Lori enrolled in nearby Auburn University, where she majored in psychology with a minor in criminology. Her parents bought her a mobile home so that she could live off campus in a manicured trailer park that was popular with students. She was living alone with her beloved dog, Peanut, a Yorkshire Terrier. Her close bond with her family remained intact, with her mother calling every day to check up on her. In 2005, she graduated with honors from Auburn University. Soon after graduation, she took up a job in the East Alabama Mental Health Center while still living in the trailer park. She also made plans to go for her master's degree in psychology in the near future. Lori's family was proud of her achievements, unaware of any foreshadowing of evil that was looming over her head. On June 10, 2006, 24-year-old Lori had made plans for a girls' night at her best friend Lindsey Braun's house. They had plans to have a few drinks and watch a movie. Lori first met Lindsey in their junior year at Auburn University. Already impressed by Lori's sweet, charming, and outgoing personality, the two girls became friends. The bond only grew stronger when they had both got a job at the same mental health facility after completing graduation. Around 6:30 p.m. on June 10th, Lori called Lindsey saying that she had to stop at the store, and then she'd head over to her house for the movie night. Unfortunately, she would never make it there. Lindsey grew worried when she did not hear from Lori again that night or the following day. She called Lori several times and left messages on her home answering machine, but she never heard back from her. When Lori did not show up at her workplace on Monday, June 12th, Lindsey's concerns skyrocketed. It was very unusual for Lori to miss work and not inform anyone. After another no-show at work on the following Tuesday, June 13th, Lindsey, along with another co-worker, went to Lori's house to check on her. When they reached the trailer home, Lindsey could not find Lori anywhere. Upon entering, she found the door unlocked and the AC on, which was pretty surprising. She also observed that Lori's dog Peanut was inside his crate. He looked well-nourished and happy, as if someone was taking care of him. Amazingly, his crate was unsoiled, even though Lori had been missing for several days at that point. Lindsey felt that something was amiss, as it was unlike Lori to leave her beloved pet alone unattended. Lindsey remembered that Lori had placed 3 rugs on her kitchen floor as the dog refused to walk on the tile. These rugs were missing, along with the outside trash can, when Lindsey entered. Later that same day, June 13, 2006, Lori's mother, Arlene, got a call from her workplace regarding Lori missing work 2 days in a row. Arlene immediately tried to call her, but could not get a hold of her. Afraid for her daughter's well-being, Arlene immediately left for Auburn after alerting her husband Casey of their daughter's disappearance. Upon arrival, she entered Lori's trailer and found a disturbing scene. She noticed the door was slightly ajar and her bed was perfectly made, but there was no sign of Lori. Her car was also missing. With a closer look, she noticed Lori's kitchen rugs, a pillow from a couch, a Galileo thermometer, a green trash can that Lori put a rake and shovel in, and the phone cord for her landline were all gone. Alarm bells rang as Arlene instantly realized something was horribly wrong. She officially reported her daughter missing, while still hoping that she would show up eventually. As the initial investigation was launched and police scanned through Lori's trailer home, they could not find any significant evidence that could link a possible suspect. However, they noticed there were obvious signs of a struggle and scuff marks on the wall. There was semen discovered on Lori's bedsheet, and traces of blood were also found on the doorknob. A coat hanger and a single golden hoop earring were also found at the scene. Police would soon recover surveillance footage on June 10, 2006, showing Lori stopping at an Alabama Walmart. That was the last known sighting of Lori, and nobody had any clue what happened to her after that. A tip would, however, soon come in later that afternoon. Arlene got a phone call from one of Lori's friends, 25-year-old Daryl Richard Ennis, who was commonly referred to as Rick. Rick told Arlene that he met Lori the day she went missing, and he thought she might have gone off to make a drug deal. Lori had met Rick Ennis at a bowling alley where he worked. She often hung out there when she was still a student. Arlene knew him because Lori invited him to spend Christmas with Lori's family in 2005, Laurie felt bad for him, having no family of his own. However, Arlene could not believe what Ennis was claiming, despite her daughter's close friendship with him. She did not believe that Laurie would ever be involved in drug dealing. She thought that he was simply lying through his teeth, but didn't have any clue as to why. Police were also given this information by Ennis himself, yet before they could act on it, a terrifying discovery was made. On June 14, 2006, 4 days after Laurie's disappearance, at approximately 4:40 a.m., her car was found fully ablaze on an impasse near the bowling alley where Rick had previously been employed. From that point on, the investigation shifted from a missing persons case to a possible homicide. According to investigators, the fire destroyed any traces of evidence that would have possibly been found inside the car. However, Laurie was not inside the vehicle at the time it was burnt. A hand-rolled cigarette was on the ground near the car. A gas can was also found close by in the woods. The incident horrified Laurie's family, and they were almost certain now that something very bad had happened to her. Investigating the information Ennis provided to Arlene was their only clue at the time. When Ennis was brought in for questioning, he repeated the same story he told Arlene, only adding more details this time. Ennis claimed that he and Laurie grew marijuana together. According to him, Laurie might have gone off to sell her share of the weed they grew together. He also added that Laurie could have been dealing with shady people. Police raided Laurie's trailer. However, even after a thorough search, the police were unable to find any evidence of Laurie dealing drugs. During the interview, investigators also took notice several scratches on Rick's hands and arms, which he claimed came from his dog. More concerning things came to light when investigators talked to Lindsay. As per Lindsay's account, she had heard Rick Ennis speaking in the background when she and Laurie last spoke on the phone the day she vanished. Since Ennis was known to be a friend of Laurie, Lindsay did not think much of it at the time. Lindsay claimed that when she texted Rick inquiring about Laurie's whereabouts, he said that she was fine when he left her. Lindsay also informed the investigators that before her disappearance, Laurie had told her that Rick had written a love letter to her. His feelings for her were not reciprocated. Lindsay also claimed that Laurie told her that she was not romantically attracted to Rick and was going to have a conversation about it with him. Later, investigators found out that Ennis told her friends about his letter and Laurie's rejection. When police re-interviewed him to confront him with the new information they collected from Lindsay, he admitted meeting her hours before her disappearance, but insisted that Laurie was perfectly fine and was preparing to go to the store when he left her house. However, investigators discovered several inconsistencies in his statement. Investigators began focusing on Rick Ennis as their prime suspect. Their suspicion only grew stronger after searching his car. Investigators found several items of interest, including a knife, some cleaning supplies, and handcuffs. To gather more evidence, investigators began digging through his past, but they were not expecting the twists they were going to be met with. Looking through the unimaginably dark past of Rick Ennis, investigators discovered that he had actually murdered his mother and stepfather when he was only 12 years of age. On March 3, 1993, just 10 months after their marriage, Ennis had beaten his mother, who was known as a sweet church-going lady, to death with a baseball bat after shooting her in the face in their trailer in North Montgomery, Alabama, where they lived. Ennis's stepfather, Eddie Joe Flowers, who was known as Elvis because of his sideburns and vibrant personality, was met with the same fate as his wife. After murdering his mother, Rick shot him in the face using a shotgun when Eddie came home from work. After the murder, Ennis drove the family car and crashed into a fence on the side of the highway. Alabama State Trooper John Clark stopped Ennis walking along the highway. When he asked him where his parents were, Ennis told him that he'd killed them. As Detective Clark searched the backpack the young boy was carrying, he found a kitchen knife and some ammunition for a 12-gauge shotgun, as well as for a .22 caliber. When asked why he killed his parents, the emotionless 12-year-old Ennis told the cops that he was mad that his parents planned to move. He said he didn't want to leave the school. For 2 days, investigators believed he lived with their bodies while continuing to go to school. He further confessed about his future plans to kill his 3 stepsisters, which further shocked the investigators at the time. Although his murders were nothing short of gruesome, due to his age, he could not be tried as an adult. As a minor at the time, he was sent to jail for 9 years for the double murder. After he was released, he moved to Auburn, where he had then met Lois Lisinski. After Lois' disappearance, Rick Ennis was the prime suspect in the case. However, in spite of Ennis's past and loads of circumstantial evidence, it was impossible to charge Ennis for Lois' murder without Lois' body or any direct evidence. Ennis left Auburn just weeks after his interview with detectives and moved elsewhere, finally ending up in Huntsville, Alabama in 2007. By then, though, Loris' case had gone cold. After moving to Huntsville, he soon moved in with a roommate, Abram Sissons. Abram noticed that Ennis brought kitchen rugs with them, which he claimed were a gift from Lori. He also told Abram that he was in love with a woman in Auburn who disappeared without a trace, but did not mention her name. Abram found nothing unusual in these conversations until he learned about Ennis's dark past. He then asked Ennis to leave immediately. Abram later claimed that when he returned to his apartment, it was completely trashed. However, the police recovered the rugs, one of which tested positive for Ennis's blood. Abram also claimed later that he saw a Galileo thermometer in Ennis's room before he moved in with him, the same kind that was missing from Lori's home. Sadly, the police could still not link Ennis to Lori's murder at this time. As their prime suspect remained at large, the case remained unsolved, while Lori's devastated family waited for answers. For years, this case had no updates. Then, in 2016, after a decade, Mark Whitaker, a special agent of the Alabama State Bureau of Investigation, opened a cold case unit and started reinvestigating Lori's disappearance along with his team, which included his longtime partner, Agent J.W. Barnes. Lori's case was their first project, and they began revisiting the evidence, sending some of the items to forensic labs for testing, and conducting several interviews and re-interviews. After the re-examination of the evidence, Ennis naturally became his main suspect. Agent Mark was aware of Ennis's past, and his gut told him that Ennis had done something similar to Lori. But he had no idea as to how to prove his guilt without more evidence or a body. However, in an unexpected twist, Agent Whitaker's partner, Agent J.W. Barnes, found an important piece of evidence while looking through the files. He discovered a report in an envelope that had not been opened for 10 years. After Lois' disappearance in 2006, police collected evidence from the trailer, but no one followed up with it until the results came in. The results showed that semen found on Lori's bedsheet and blood on the interior side of the front door contained Rick Ennis's DNA. After organizing all the evidence, investigators built a strong case against Rick Ennis and were eventually able to get an indictment order in 2018. By this time, Ennis was happily engaged to a school librarian named Alana Atkinson and was living in Pilot, Virginia. There, he was working for a company that designed and built portable living structures called yurts. On August 6, 2018, on his 38th birthday, 12 years after Lois Lisinski went missing from Auburn, Rick Ennis was arrested by a task force of U.S. Marshals. While it came as a relief to Lori's family, Ennis's fiancée and co-workers were shocked by this turn of events. After being arrested on 2 counts of capital murder, his trial was postponed due to COVID-19. The trial finally began on April 1, 2022. While the prosecution presented all the evidence that suggested Ennis's involvement in the crime, including the cigarette butt in Lori's bedsheet containing his DNA, the defense argued that police could have taken the cigarette from Ennis's home and planted it at the crime scene. They also attacked Lois Lisinski's character by trying to portray her as a drug dealer. To explain how his DNA got on the bedsheet, Rick claimed that he had consensual sex with Lori before her disappearance, suggesting that they were still intimate despite Lori's rejection of his advances. However, his story did not seem very convincing, especially when 2 more witnesses came forward with jaw-dropping information. One of his former co-workers in Alabama, Jeremy Brooks, stated that on June 9, 2006, just 1 day prior to Lori's mysterious disappearance, he received a call from Ennis asking if he could bring him gas and if he could keep the gas tank. Jeremy rejected his request.
What did he say? All of the A's and it was a way that I could run in and get nothing gas.
Later, after police found Lois' scorched car in a gas can, It matched the description of a gas can that was missing from the bowling alley where Ennis worked. Another of his former co-workers from South Carolina, Terry Booth, testified about the chilling experience she had with Ennis years prior. Terry remembered asking Ennis why he moved from Auburn. Ennis told him that he had to get rid of a body. Although he thought Ennis was just joking with him, the announcement of his arrest for Lori's murder proved otherwise. Although Rick Ennis continued to deny all allegations against him and maintained his innocence, jurors came up with a guilty verdict after 2 days of deliberation. He was facing the death penalty for the crime, but the DA agreed to take the death penalty off the table after consulting with Arlene. Arlene later said that she felt agreeing to a life without parole sentence for Rick Ennis would save her from years of potential appeal hearings, but would also ensure that Ennis would never be free. On April 14, 2022, he was sentenced to life without parole. He remains incarcerated in William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility in Bessemer, Alabama. For Lynx Lasinski, the outcome was bittersweet. With tears in her eyes, she shared that it meant she had to finally accept that Lori was never coming home, an incredible hope that a portion of her heart always clung to. Let us know in the comment section what your thoughts are on this tragic case. Do you think Rick Ennis will ever give up the location of Lori's remains? If you like our content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Nancy Lagerquist. On the night of Sunday, July 1st, 1990, Nancy Lagerquist, an 87-year-old resident at Riverside Healthcare Center, was last seen alive. At around 3:30 a.m., a care worker witnessed the elderly woman sound asleep in her bed. She was not distressed and appeared peaceful. The care worker closed her bedroom door and moved on to the next room. Nancy had been a resident at Riverside since December of 1988. Born in Hamilton, Montana in 1902, she graduated high school at the age of 18 and spent much of her life working as an executive secretary. Nancy was an active member of the Missoula Business and Professional Women's Club prior to her retirement. She never married, had no children, and had little in the way of relatives at the time of her death. Those family members, a sister, 2 nieces, and 3 nephews, didn't live near the care home. By all accounts, Nancy lived an ordinary life in the care home. She was unable to walk, and so she required around-the-clock assistance. There was nothing about her background to suggest there was a target on her back at the time of her death. At 4:30 a.m., 1 hour after Nancy was checked on at Riverside on July 1st, a worker checked on her room once more. This time, however, the alarm was raised. The 87-year-old was gone. The 5 employees on shift scattered across the building in an attempt to locate the elderly woman, but there was no sign of her. 11 minutes later, at 4:41 a.m., the police were alerted to Nancy's disappearance. Law enforcement promptly arrived on the scene, accompanied by search and rescue teams. They carried out an extensive search of the home and the surrounding area. The residence was located along the Clark Fork River, and boats manned by police officers were dispatched along the water. At 6:30 a.m., the search was called off. Authorities had found Nancy dead near the riverbank, about 30 minutes downstream from Riverside. She had been murdered in a manner that was described by police as ritualistic. The circumstances of her death were violent, stemming from sexual assault with an object. Her body was then dumped into the water. To investigators working on the case, it soon became apparent that they would have their work cut out for them. The fact that Nancy's body had been put in the water had washed away any traces of forensic evidence, and her diaper has never been located. The police have never put forward a theory about the weapon used in the murder, and it, too, has never been found. Detectives soon theorized the culprit had entered and exited through Nancy's bedroom window, which faced the river, as the screen had been cut. However, the perpetrator had managed not to leave behind any evidence on the window, or sill, or in the rest of the bedroom. Furthermore, none of the alarms had gone off at any of the home's entrances, and all were in working order. It's unclear if the home was dusted for prints, but given the amount of staff, residents, and guests coming and going from the home, it would have been a very arduous task if it had. The only lead in the case was a man seen by a member of staff at around 4 a.m., walking through the car park of the neighboring Missoula Athletic Club, away from the river and towards East Broadway Street. He is described as being white, between the ages of 30 and 40, and weighing around 180 to 200 pounds. He has light brown, collar-length hair, a moustache, and brown-rimmed glasses, and was wearing an untucked white and brown striped t-shirt, tan-button front shorts, and white tennis shoes with white socks. His t-shirt was longer at the back than the front. This man was never considered a suspect, but was wanted for questioning. However, it's unclear if he ever made contact with the police or was even identified by them. Reportedly, the description led to the police becoming inundated with reports. Due to Nancy's minimal family ties, a family connection was quickly ruled out, after which the authorities turned their attention to staff members. Staff at the care home would be familiar with its layout and its security measures and would know who was best to target. Investigators felt that the murder could well be an inside job and homed in on one male staff member in particular. He was eventually cleared of being involved, but left the care home less than a month later. It is unclear why he left. After ruling out the staff member, the police began to look at the possibility that the crime was the work of an outsider. They noted that security focused on the doors to the home, not the windows, and speculated that Nancy was picked because she was in a room facing onto the river and was not targeted for any reason more specific than that. They interviewed a man named James Bailey on multiple occasions, but eventually dropped in as a suspect. Eventually, detectives looked back at the witness statements they'd collected regarding any other potentially suspicious deaths in the home. One nurse had drawn their attention to the demise of an 86-year-old woman named Bertha Scott, an Alzheimer's sufferer who was discovered dead in her bed on May 2, 1990. She was put into restraints at night to stop her from wandering off, and because she'd suffered from heart disease, her death was assumed to be from natural causes. Neither the staff nor her family felt her demise was suspicious, except for the one nurse who had noted a bruise on Bertha's neck. She was buried without autopsy. Around the time of Bertha's death, the care home staff had also noticed that there had been some tampering with the windows of the physical therapy room, although nothing ever really came of this. On the back of the nurse's comments, the police decided to exhume Bertha's body and double-check her cause of death. Her family was shocked when the police announced that she had actually been raped before being strangled to death. Bertha's life was rather different from Nancy's. She had been born in Pennsylvania in 1904 and was married 20 years later. She had moved to Missoula just 2 years before her death so that she could be closer to one of her surviving children. 4 of her 6 children had died before her, though she was succeeded by a vast number of grandchildren. During Bertha's medical examination, it was discovered that semen had been left behind. Although a sample was collected, it was too degraded to produce a DNA profile which would help the police find her killer. From here, both cases grew cold. In 1992, a man at another care home was arrested for sexually assaulting one of the residents. However, he was in prison at the time of the murders. The police also suspected Lloyd Chase Allen of being involved that same year, but he too was behind bars when the crimes were committed. In 2002, the Missoulian reported that several of the care home residents had spoken of a man who roamed the halls at night, but staff had never been sure if he was real or not because the residents' memories and testimony were often unreliable. It's possible this man was real and that there are more cases like Bertha's where residents were killed, but it was deemed that they had died from natural causes. However, without DNA evidence, a confession, or further investigation, it seems likely we will never see this case solved. Kaysera Stops Pretty Places. Born on August 14, 2001, Kaysera Stops Pretty Places and her large family were members of various Native American reservations in Montana, including the Crow and North Cheyenne nations. An extremely athletic individual, Keisara was fond of basketball, football, running cross-country, and wrestling. In her teen years, she had performed in several plays at Hardin High School and participated in the school's choir. She had a big heart and was described as compassionate and loving by all those who knew her. She could often be found tending to stray animals in her spare time. But Keisara's biggest ambition was to become a performer. She wanted to act and sing, and the future looked bright for the determined team until her life was horrifically ripped away shortly after her 18th birthday. Keisara was last seen on August 24, 2019, in Hardin, a rural town less than half a mile off the Crow Reservation, where she lived with her legal guardian and grandmother, Yolanda Frazier. It's unclear where the teen was aiming to go, but one thing is for certain: she never returned home. She had planned the following day to meet with her mother to visit North Dakota, but she failed to turn up for this get-together. Her family quickly noticed that their texts were going unanswered, their phone calls simply rang, and that Keisara was not active on social media, which was perhaps the most telling clue of all that something was wrong. Later that day, Keisara's aunt, Percilia Bolteo, went to report her niece missing to the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office, but was told there was a mandatory waiting period before the report could be filed. This was later proven to be a lie. In Montana, anyone under the age of 21 is considered a minor, and an Amber Alert should have been issued. Instead, it wasn't until August 27th that Keisara's family was able to file the missing persons reports. The police reportedly told Percilia that the teen was probably out with her friends. There is no record, but following her disappearance, law enforcement attempted to search for the teenager. They also didn't hand out flyers, which may have helped trace her final movements and prompt witnesses to step forward. Percilia felt that because of Keisara's troubled past and history of running away, law enforcement didn't take her case seriously. Although much of the 18-year-old's past remains a mystery to the public, it has been noted in recent articles that she had some issues with alcohol. In April of 2019, she was found unresponsive at school because she was heavily intoxicated and she had to be rushed to the ER. Then, on August 29th, a passing jogger discovered Keisara's body by a woodpile in the back garden of a home at the intersection of Mitchell Avenue and Rangeview Drive, in the Hardin suburb where she was last seen alive 5 days earlier. The homeowner was out of town when her body was found and had no connection to the teenager. Keisara's family were not notified immediately that a body had been found. Reports of a teenager's remains being discovered began circulating on social media, and the family caught wind of the rumors. They began to fear the worst. Percilia went to the scene to ID the body, but was turned away without being able to view the remains, and the local media were not alerted to the fact that a body had been found. Keisara's mother, along with Yolanda, then went to the local mortuary so they could view the body on September 1st. But they were informed that the body didn't belong to the missing teen, and so the family continued the search. It wasn't until 10 days later it was revealed that the body was in fact Keisara's. The coroner ruled that she had perished on August 26th and that her death was suspicious. Her remains were already badly decomposed, so the cause of death could not be determined. Asphyxiation could not be ruled out. Following this discovery, the teenager's family kept the pressure on law enforcement to investigate the death. On September 12th, Keisara's mother, Geraldine, was told by Terry Bullis, the county coroner and the owner of Bullis Mortuary, that her daughter's remains had to be cremated in order to be returned to the family, despite the fact this was against the family's cultural beliefs and would remove the possibility of further examinations of the body. Furthermore, the family had wanted the Dahl Funeral Home in Billings, Montana to handle funeral arrangements, but Bullis made them use his business and ordered Keisara's cremation before other family members arrived in Hardin. On September 14th, the family located the site where Keisara's body was discovered with the help of relatives who lived nearby. They had attempted to visit the area a few days earlier, but were unable to because the scene was no longer sealed off and there was no demarcation of where the body was found. At the scene, they performed a ritual ceremony and noted that the area was very visible and had high traffic. A neighbor, Jason Cummings, who had found the body, told the family that the police had removed Kaysera's phone from her pockets and that he had told them to charge it so her family could be contacted, although they appeared to ignore this suggestion. He, too, had questioned why the crime scene hadn't been sanctioned off to prevent contamination. 5 days later, on September 19th, the family alerted the media to the case. The Billings Gazette told them that they called the sheriff's office daily for any crime updates and hadn't been made aware of the case. That same day, Yolanda, along with Kaysera's father Alan, went to meet up with Captain Mike Fuss of the Bighorn Sheriff County's office. When they asked why Fuss had not made contact with the family or returned their calls, he told them he had been preoccupied with other cases. When they asked why the crime scene had not been sealed off, he explained that if investigators arrived on the scene before uniformed officers, then they did not need to seal off the scene. According to Fuss, the scene was only sealed off if officers arrive first. Then Yolanda and Alan asked why law enforcement had not charged and turned on Kaysera's phone. Fuss was reportedly surprised that the family knew about this, and he said that the battery was dead, and so they didn't attempt to use it. Kaysera's family countered this by noting that they could have charged the phone and looked at her recent communications. But Fuss said they couldn't get into that phone and that not even the FBI could. Furthermore, Fuss implied that Kaysera had died from alcohol poisoning where she was found and seemed angry when the family told him they were offering a $5,000 reward for any information. He also revealed that the original investigator on the case, Jeremy Middlestead, had stepped down because he, quote, couldn't handle it. Notably, Kaysera's family were not interviewed by law enforcement until this time. They also spoke with the Bighorn County attorney, Jay Harris, who told the family that the coroner, Terry Bullis, had a conflict of interest in his position as a funeral home business and the county medical examiner. Harris also noted that Bullis tended to quickly determine the cause of death as exposure to alcohol and natural causes under his charge as coroner. However, Harris was otherwise reportedly brusque and rude towards the family, and failed to provide them with clear answers to any of their questions, at one point telling them, "How do you know that nothing is being done?" On the 23rd, the family were notified that no missing persons report had been filed for Kaysera, and that her name was not in the missing persons database. A week later, the FBI declined to take the case on, stating they needed more evidence that Kaysera was murdered on the reservation. Interestingly, just days before Kaysera vanished, she had filmed a video of several police officers beating her 15-year-old wheelchair-bound brother and uploaded it to social media. The incident involved several deputies from the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office, leading to several officers being reprimanded. It is believed one of the officers who responded to the scene where Kaysera's body was found was one of those involved in the beating. This has sparked much speculation that the police were involved in her death or opted not to investigate in retaliation for Kaysera attempting to hold them responsible for their actions. In August of 2021, 2 years after the teenager's death, a fresh report revealed that 4 witnesses had been discovered. The statements of these individuals are not fully consistent, but generally describe a series of events which led to an argument outside of a home on Rangeview Drive at around 3 a.m. on August 26, 2019, involving Kaysera and 3 other unarmed individuals, including a 17-year-old girl, 19-year-old woman, and 23-year-old man. Some reports mentioned that Kaysera had been hanging out at the house and that an occupant had purchased alcohol for her. Reportedly, her blood alcohol level at the time of her demise was 0.149. The argument that had occurred that night led to another nearby homeowner setting off his car alarm, hoping it would cause the group to flee. They did, scattering in different directions. Kaysera was last seen heading towards the area where her body was later found. The new report also mentioned that no foreign DNA was discovered underneath her fingernails and that she was diagnosed with asthma shortly before her disappearance. Kaysera's case is still unsolved. If you have any information about her disappearance and subsequent death, then you can contact the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office at 406-665-97. The teenage years are the most challenging of all the stages of growing up. Not a child anymore, but not yet an adult, this time can be characterized The body undergoes a massive hormonal overhaul, further complicating this transitional period. Yesterday's obedient child becomes unstable and prone to rebellion. A teenager's worldview is a picture of contrasts, consisting of black and white tones. The prevailing color in the teen's judgments and actions largely depends on their environment. The story we're about to discuss occurred in Medicine Hat, in the southeast of Alberta, Canada. Incomprehensible cruelty and betrayal befell the Richardson family. Their tragedy gained national attention, and once again, the Gothic subculture came under fire. In town, the Richardson family was considered exemplary. Deborah and Mark, along with their children, 8-year-old Tyler and 12-year-old Jasmine, lived in a beautiful and cozy place. Like all Canadians, they were very hospitable and sociable. Their home was often filled with guests, and the atmosphere was built on principles of love and respect. Everything was going well until the eldest daughter entered puberty. The once calm girl changed beyond recognition. First and foremost, Jasmine's character changed. She became bold and frivolous. Conflicts between her and her parents began to occur, and her academic performance dropped. Secondly, her preferences in music and clothing transformed. Whereas she previously enjoyed modern pop, she now took an interest in heavy rock. Bright colors in clothing were replaced by shades of gray and black, and her dressing style became provocative. Jasmine wanted to appeal to boys, so she began to emphasize her rounded shapes. Her interaction with former friends noticeably decreased. She began to spend more time alone in front of her computer screen. The door to her room was often closed. With the introduction of the internet at home, she became interested in Gothic themes, dark poetry, criminal psychology, and human anatomy. Miss Richardson even identified herself as a witch, preaching the Wiccan religion. For this purpose, she visited various websites of similar nature, where she found a circle of friends who shared her interests. "Welcome to my tragic world," was the greeting on her social media page. It seemed like a typical adolescence, spiced with excessive dramatism and mysticism. However, the girl became more and more detached from her family. In her profile, she listed a fictitious name and age of 15. She liked older interlocutors, wanting to match them. Her parents tried to support their daughter during this difficult period, suggesting spending time together. They looked for common ground, activities. However, she found this uninteresting. Jasmine considered her younger brother to be an annoying nuisance. Thus, she spoke to him less and less. Yet she could spend hours on end at the computer, talking to strangers. Deborah and Mark understood that this state was temporary. She would grow up, become wiser. Therefore, they were quite tolerant of her new hobbies. One day, Jasmine told them she would like to go to a concert of a punk rock band. Her parents agreed, if only they knew what this outing would lead to. Early 2006, Jasmine Richardson went to a concert of a local youth band, pursuing her own interests, knowing he would be there. Jeremy Steinke, the boy who had been stirring her heart for months, he too was fascinated by Gothic culture. They met on a vampire enthusiast's website, where they occasionally communicated. Jeremy portrayed himself as a 300-year-old werewolf thirsting for blood. To prove it, he wore a vial of blood around his neck, though it was unclear whether the fluid was of human or animal origin. Nonetheless, the boy clearly considered himself special, which Jasmine found very appealing. Meeting at the concert, the young people grew even fonder of each other. Eventually, Steinke asked her out, and she joyfully accepted. All would be fine, except Jeremy was 23 years old. The couple knew her parents would disapprove of their relationship, so they kept it a secret. Moreover, his troubled past would hardly endear him to them. The young man was poor and lived in a trailer with his mother and sister. His relationship with his mother was strained due to her excessive drinking. Jeremy had endured her constant stream of volatile partners, who often beat him in their drunken rages. As a result, by the age of 13, he was struggling academically and had a fragile psyche. Once, unable to bear such a life, Steinke attempted to hang himself, but was fortunately stopped in time. Afterward, doctors diagnosed him with depression and hyperactivity. Bullied at school, he decided to stop attending. Over time, Jeremy fancied himself immortal and began frequenting websites of similar themes. His online profile was filled with topics like pain, self-harm, blood, and razor blades. No one knew about the couple's forbidden relationship except their friends, who found their love, to say the least, peculiar. Their communication would have remained a secret had the Richardsons not started monitoring their daughter's excessive internet use. Deborah and Mark discovered Jasmine was corresponding with strangers, alarming them as any parent would. Therefore, they decided to remove the computer from the girl's reach. Moreover, they were shocked to learn she had fallen for an adult man with dubious interests. His very nickname, Soul Eater, spoke volumes. Thus, Jasmine and Jeremy's relationship became forbidden. To help their daughter break free from this destructive relationship, Deborah and Mark sought a psychologist's help. They sincerely believed that counseling would benefit their parent-child relationship. To their delight, it did. Jasmine showed compliance and seemed to be returning to a normal life. Promising that it was all in the past, she got her computer back. This became the Richardsons' last fateful decision, leading to their demise. Saturday, April 22, 2006. Preparing for bed, Mrs. Richardson heard a noise in the basement. "Rats again," she thought. Descending, she turned on the light and saw a person in a ski mask. He stood opposite her, looking at her. Startled, she screamed. The stranger rushed at her, covering her mouth. His efforts were in vain. Deborah struggled and screamed louder. He stepped back, drew a knife and stabbed her in the chest, then again and again. Hearing his wife's screams, Mark rushed down, grabbing the first thing he could find, a screwdriver. He had been fixing an outlet that day and by sheer chance left the tool out. Entering the basement, he was met with a horrific scene, his wife lying in a pool of blood and someone standing next to her. Mark immediately attacked the intruder but received a stab wound to the stomach, followed by more stabs. As the searing pain subsided and his eyes began to close, Mr. Richardson quietly asked, "Why?" "Because your daughter wished it," the attacker replied. Upstairs, Tyler was the only one left. The boy sat on his bed in his pajamas, too frightened to move. The approaching footsteps grew louder, and the bedroom door opened. A few days before the murder, Jasmine was overjoyed. Her parents believed in her remorse, meaning they could now communicate again. Mobile phones were just becoming popular at that time, so the computer remained the only means of communication. As soon as Miss Richardson regained internet access, she immediately wrote to Jeremy. "It all starts with them disappearing and ends with us staying together," she told him. During the days when the young lady was visiting the psychologist, a terrible plan had formed in her head. It solidified over several days of punishment. Surprisingly, Steinke found it enticing, but added that everything needed to be done creatively and with attention to detail. The couple understood that they could not be together as long as the Richardsons were alive. Later, Jasmine's friends recalled how often she spoke about her parents, particularly how much they annoyed her. Therefore, she wanted to end their lives. However, no one took Jasmine's words seriously. Saturday, April 22, 2006. Garrett headed across the street to his friend Tyler's house. The boy wanted to play. The weather was nice outside, despite being chilly. Such was the spring that year. When Garrett approached the house, he noticed the blinds were still closed. No one answered his knock on the door. Strange, he thought. The Richardsons should be home. Their car is parked in the driveway. Hoping to see someone, the child curiously peeked into the living room window but saw no one. Then, Garrett decided to walk around to the back of the basement, where he often played with Tyler. Peeking through the window, he saw something strange on the floor. It appeared to be two silhouettes in a pool of blood, the boy informed his mother. Skeptical, she decided to check on the family across the street. They approached the house together. Garrett pointed to the window he had looked through earlier. The woman looked in and recoiled in horror. She immediately called emergency services. Something happened at the Richardsons. They seemed to be lying in the basement floor, all in blood. the neighbor reported. The police arrived promptly. Breaking down the front door, they descended to where Garrett and his mother had seen something. Entering the dark basement, the officers had difficulty recognizing the people lying on the ground. Their bodies were mutilated and bloodied. But there was no doubt. It was Mark and Deborah Richardson, and they were deceased. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, walls, even the ceiling. A bloody mess. No other way to describe what was before them. Later, the police searched the house. In the upstairs children's room, they found a small child. The boy lay in bed among toys, splattered with blood with visible knife wounds. The child's throat had been deeply cut. Medicine Hat had never seen such horror. One officer said, "It will take me decades to forget what I saw today." After the house was searched, the police realized one family member was missing. The Richardsons' eldest daughter was gone. Officers worried she might be in danger. Everything indicated the attack occurred in the basement and the child's room. The rest of the house was undisturbed, and at first glance, nothing was missing. The state of the bodies suggested the crime occurred the previous night. Apparently, the perpetrator broke into the house and attacked the boy and his parents. Then what happened to Jasmine, and where was she? The police began to construct theories about what had happened. Perhaps by some stroke of luck, the girl was somewhere outside the home, safe. Or the perpetrator had abducted her and was now harming her, or maybe a ransom demand from relatives would come with time. However, as time passed, there were no clear answers. Soon, detectives turned to the media, requesting help in the search for the missing girl. They hoped Jasmine would make contact, or someone would provide valuable information. Meanwhile, the investigation into the crime continued. Investigators interviewed relatives, friends, and colleagues about all aspects of the slain family's life. Did they have any adversaries or enemies capable of such a heinous act? However, the more the investigation progressed, the clearer it became. There was no reason to wish death upon anyone in the Richardson family. They were truly wonderful people, faithful spouses and loving parents, except for the eldest daughter. Officers learned that the girl had been causing quite a bit of trouble lately. Therefore, the tone of media announcements changed. This time, the investigation wanted to locate a person of interest. It was entirely possible that the girl knew details about the crime, or she might have been involved in it. Considering the suspect's age, the media could no longer publish her real name, as per Canadian law. Thus, news agencies began to refer to Jasmine Richardson as JR. After it became known about her relationship with Jeremy Steinck, the couple was declared wanted. Initially, the search for the young lovers began among their friends and acquaintances, thinking they might be hiding out with them. However, this lead proved to be a dead end for the police, but they did uncover something intriguing. A few hours after the crime, the young couple was spotted at a restaurant and at a party hosted by an acquaintance. Someone from their circle of friends mentioned that Jasmine appeared unchanged. There was no indication she had been abducted or was in a state of shock. She was drinking and having fun. When friends asked how they managed to escape from her parents, Jasmine laughed. "Jeremy and I just took care of them." "Yes," the boy agreed. "I carved them up like fish." The party guests laughed, thinking it a grim joke, unaware that the statement was true. The involvement in the crime was also confirmed by a comic found in Jasmine's school locker, where she detailed how she would deal with each of her family members, with her boyfriend as her accomplice. Photos of the suspects were distributed widely. It was only a matter of time before a citizen would step forward with information about their whereabouts. Soon enough, information came in. The couple was spotted in the community of Leader, Saskatchewan, approximately 130 kilometers from Medicine Hat. Caught off guard, Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinck were found sleeping peacefully in a pickup truck. Without resistance, they were taken to the police station. Naturally, the couple was interrogated separately, starting with Jasmine. She shared that she was deeply in love with Steinck, and he reciprocated her feelings. However, the difference in age and social status was a barrier between them. According to Jasmine, the Richardsons would never have accepted their relationship. Therefore, Jeremy committed the ultimate act of love. He ended her parents' lives, providing them the chance to be together. When detectives asked if Jasmine was involved in the crime, she said, "I wasn't home when the crimes occurred. I didn't know about what had happened. After I found out, I accepted it. I loved Jeremy very much, so I ran away with him." Detectives needed to determine who was the main instigator. Since breaking the suspects proved difficult, the investigation used a cunning strategy. They placed an informant in the cell with Jeremy, who skillfully extracted details that contradicted Jasmine's statements. Jeremy confessed to the informant that the plan to end her parents' lives was Jasmine's idea. Initially, he was not supportive, but agreed after they discovered the forbidden love and took away her computer. "I took care of Deborah and Mark Richardson, and Jasmine took care of her younger brother herself. She literally begged me to leave Tyler for her, though I was glad to settle scores with all of them," Jeremy cruelly revealed. After this confession, investigators confronted Miss Richardson with the recording. She had no choice but to confess to everything, admitting she stabbed her younger brother out of mercy, not wanting to leave him an orphan. Later, the couple shared their social media profiles and passwords with the investigation, which began to examine their correspondence. They had sent each other thousands of messages, confirming Jeremy's statements. Jasmine indeed conceived the plan on her own. Steinke wrote that Jasmine was the only person who supported and approved of his tastes, replacing the society he felt alienated from. Fearing he would lose her, he helped realize the dreadful idea. "I want to slit their throats. They will regret what they have done, especially when I make sure they're gone. They'll pay for the insults. Finally, there will be silence. Their blood will be the payment." Jeremy supported his beloved. His friends also reported that just a few hours before the attack, they watched the 1994 film Natural Born Killers, which portrays a couple committing 9 heinous murders. This story inspired their friend, who said he wanted to enact a similar plan with his girlfriend. "I think it's the best love story of all time," Steinke said. With sufficient evidence at hand, the suspects were charged with 3 counts of homicide. The detectives pieced together the confessions of the accused, witness testimonies, and other case evidence to form a clear picture of the crime. Before the act, Jeremy was intoxicated. Jasmine led him into the house and guided him to the basement, where he attacked her mother. Deborah was the first to die, suffering 12 stab wounds across her body. The deepest wound pierced her chest, reaching 12 centimeters deep and striking her heart. In a rage, Jeremy mercilessly continued his assault on Mark, who sustained 24 wounds, 9 of which were in the back. Like his wife, the family patriarch bled out on the basement floor. Tyler Richardson was the last to die. While Steinke was dealing with the parents downstairs, Jasmine inflicted 5 stab wounds on her younger brother upstairs. After Jeremy finished, he went upstairs to help his girlfriend with the child, coldly slashing the boy's throat as if carving a pumpkin. Afterward, Jeremy went home to wash off the blood, while Jasmine caught a taxi to a restaurant where the couple had agreed to meet. After discussing the night's events, they headed to a party. A friend of Jeremy's, Casey Lancaster, helped them dispose of the evidence and reach Saskatchewan. Words fail to describe the horror they created. The couple embarked on their murderous spree with such ease and nonchalance as if driven by some otherworldly force. It is shocking that during interrogations and their time in custody, not a word of regret or remorse was uttered for their actions. While detained, they wrote letters to each other, calling themselves legends and immortals. In one letter, Steinke proposed to Richardson, who joyfully accepted. Then, unexpectedly, their mad love began to fade like last year's snow. During the trial, they shifted the blame onto each other. In June 2007, Jasmine Richardson was the first to stand trial. She pleaded not guilty, claiming to have been in a zombie-like state and unable to act while Jeremy was killing her family. She also claimed she only wounded her younger brother, and it was Steinke who delivered the fatal blow. Jasmine insisted that their discussions about ending her parents' lives were purely hypothetical, but they appealed to Jeremy so much that he compelled her to turn them into reality. Under 3 counts of homicide, Miss Richardson was sentenced to just 10 years in prison, thanks to the nuances of Canadian juvenile criminal justice law, which states that individuals under 14 cannot be sentenced to more than 10 years of imprisonment. The sentence was aimed more at rehabilitating and restoring the girl's psyche than punishing her. In 2008, Jeremy Steink's trial commenced. He insisted he had no initial intention of ending the lives of his girlfriend's parents. However, once discovered in the basement, he felt compelled to attack. He claimed he did not harm Tyler, suggesting Jasmine was responsible while he merely watched from the doorway. The defense argued that Jasmine had intentionally seduced him, wishing for him to free her from her parents' strict control. Some friends testified that Jeremy had sought their help with the act, driven by his fear of losing Jasmine to the extent of being willing to do anything. The lawyers also requested the charges be reduced to manslaughter, arguing Steinke was under the influence of substances at the time of the act. Steinke's inconsistencies emerged when, asked by the prosecution why he committed the act, he replied, "When you find your other half, you do whatever it takes for them." Throughout the trial, he remained indifferent to the proceedings, but broke down when Jacqueline May, his mother, testified in his defense. She admitted to bearing significant guilt for his upbringing, as he was often attacked by her partners, subjected to beatings and rejection. Steinke was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree homicide, receiving 3 life sentences. He would be eligible for parole no earlier than 25 years later, in 2033. Charges of complicity in the act against Casey Lancaster were dropped. In Medicine Hat Court, she was found guilty of obstruction of justice, sentenced to a year of house arrest, and prohibited from consuming drugs and alcohol. While in custody, Jeremy Steinke changed his name to Jackson May. Jasmine Richardson's 10-year sentence included 4 years in a psychiatric facility, where she was diagnosed with conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder, indicative of a refusal to follow rules and socially unacceptable behavior, typically more associated with children than adults. This underscored her psychological immaturity and instability during her relationship with Steinke. In her final years under conditional community supervision and attending special programs, medical professionals reported her genuine remorse. After serving her full sentence, she was released in 2016. Currently, Jasmine Richardson lives in Canada under an assumed name, her true identity still protected from media disclosure. Her return sparked significant public debate, with some arguing she deserved a second chance, while others believed she warranted a harsher penalty. Nonetheless, the residents of Medicine Hat would prefer not to have Miss Richardson as their neighbor again, given the brutality of her crime. Whether Jasmine has truly changed after spending her formative years in detention remains to be seen. Time will tell. The case of Yvonne Baldelli, a hellish love story on a heavenly island. Sometimes the search for paradise on Earth can lead one straight into a real-life hell from which escape is impossible. However, it's only fair to note that a significant factor in this journey is who accompanies you in search of this paradise. Choosing a companion should always be done with the utmost care and caution. Yet sometimes, even the person who seems closest and dearest can turn into a true, merciless monster. The tale of Yvonne Baldelli and Brian Brimiger began like something out of a fairy tale. Yvonne thought she had found true love, for which she was ready to run to the ends of the earth. However, from the very beginning, her relationship raised concerns among Yvonne's family, who disapproved of her partner. Unfortunately, the family's worries were not unfounded. This complex case started in 2011, when a happy and in-love Yvonne left with her beloved for a tropical island. As it turned out, she was heading straight towards her own demise. Only several years later, disfigured fragments of her body were discovered in the swamp, bagged alongside the remains of her cherished pets. Yvonne's family exerted considerable effort to achieve justice, efforts that cost another family member their life. Who was Yvonne Baldelli? Yvonne Olivia Baldelli, May Fold, was born on June 30, 1969, in a small town in the southern part of sunny California. She was the third and youngest child of Marjorie and James Fold, growing up alongside her older brother Michael and sister Michelle, with whom she shared a particularly close bond from childhood. When Yvonne was 13, her mother passed away after a long illness. A year later, her father remarried to Lilian Faust, and the grown children developed wonderful relationships with their stepmother, a kind and caring woman who loved her husband's children as her own. Yvonne received a solid education and explored several career paths, but her main passion was always fashion design, and she dreamed of turning her hobby into a profitable business. However, luck never seemed to be on her side when it came to her personal life. She was married twice, but both marriages ended in separation. Additionally, a surgery she underwent in her youth, followed by complications, left Yvonne unable to have children. After divorcing her second husband, Kevin Baldelli, in 2007, Yvonne lived alone in her small apartment with her beloved dog, whom she affectionately called her child. She remained in constant contact with her father and sister, calling them almost daily and making an effort to see her family at least once a month. Meeting Brian and the love triangle. In 2009, as Yvonne was preparing to celebrate her 40th birthday, she met a Marine named Brian Brimmager. At that time, he was legally married and raising a young son with his wife. Despite this, Brian was open to having an affair and shared with his mistress how unhappy he was in his marriage, claiming he hadn't filed for divorce solely because of his child, whom he didn't want to distress. Baldelli fell for this fit and handsome man at first sight and believed every word he said. Having experienced the pain of a loveless marriage herself, and knowing how hard it can be to leave such a relationship, she didn't rush her partner, believing that the presence of a child was indeed the main obstacle. However, Brian wasn't as straightforward and sincere as he appeared. From a young age, his attractive looks had made him very popular with the opposite sex. He was accustomed to juggling multiple relationships simultaneously and expertly deceived the women who fell for him, promising each one marriage, a family, and eternal love. It soon came to light that the married Brimmager was not only seeing Yvonne, but also had another mistress. This other woman was Christine Verhoeven, a stunning blonde with extensive connections. She was an analyst at the White House and had made a remarkable career during George W. Bush Jr.'s administration. When Yvonne discovered the existence of another rival, she decided to confront the issue head-on and was ready to fight for the man she loved. Gathering her courage, she called her lover's wife to inform her that Brian was cheating on her with not just one, but two women. This revelation sparked a major scandal, forcing Brian to make a difficult choice. Eventually, he chose Yvonne, though it's possible she pressured him into making this decision. A few months later, Brian officially divorced his wife and moved in with his new love interest. At that time, he was still serving in the Marines, but had been contemplating ending his military career for a while. The couple seemed genuinely happy, but Yvonne's relatives remained wary of her new partner, doubting the sincerity of his feelings. Moving to a tropical paradise. In the summer of 2011, Brian began to talk about radically changing his life, leaving the service, moving away from the bustling city, and settling down on the tropical island. Yvonne shared his sentiments, supported him in everything, and was ready to follow him wherever and whenever he decided. She believed she had met the most important man in her life and adored him. By September of the same year, the decision was final. The couple chose to move to Panama and settle on the small island of Carnero, a place that could truly be called a paradise. Yvonne informed her family just before leaving, so they had no chance to persuade her to reconsider. Yvonne sold her apartment, quit her job, and started packing for the journey. She took only a few bikinis, shorts, tank tops, and her sewing machine, hoping to fulfill her dream of opening a small boutique to create and sell custom outfits to tourists on the new island. In early September, Brian, Yvonne, and her beloved little dog flew to Panama. They spent a couple of days in the country's capital before taking a ferry to Carnero Island, where they rented a house right on the oceanfront. The climate was hot and humid with little temperature variation, attracting a steady flow of tourists throughout the year, primarily diving and surfing enthusiasts. The island was just 1 square kilometer, so one could leisurely walk around it in about an hour. All the infrastructure was located along the coast, while the interior was dense jungle and swampy areas teeming with venomous snakes, spiders, and other wildlife, making it unsafe to venture into. Brian, who had been an excellent guitar player since his youth, brought his instrument with the intention of starting a musical career on the island, performing in entertainment venues. Within a week after moving, he had made connections with several local bar owners, and one of them happily offered him a job. He played in the evenings, entertaining the crowd, but his appreciative audience often bought him drinks as a compliment, leading him to drink heavily almost daily. Yvonne's business also developed very slowly, with weak sales and virtually no profit. However, she didn't lose heart. She started working at one of the bars and even adopted a second dog she found on the island and decided to keep. She communicated with her sister, Michelle Valenzuela, almost daily, sharing everything. But her messages became increasingly shorter and more somber, which worried her family. The first few months on the island seemed like paradise to the couple. Yvonne hoped that Brian would propose, and they would have a romantic wedding ceremony on the ocean shore. But time passed. Brian didn't rush into marriage, and their relationship rapidly deteriorated. The mysterious disappearance. In early December, Michelle stopped receiving messages from Yvonne, which raised her concerns significantly. Then, on December 14, 2011, Brian unexpectedly called Michelle, inquiring when he could stop by to pick up his SUV, which he had left in her garage before heading to Panama. This call and question caught Michelle off guard. It meant Brian had returned to the U.S. and wanted to retrieve his vehicle. But where was Yvonne? Why hadn't she come back or even called? In response, Brian claimed he had explained everything in an email sent a few days earlier. He also mentioned that his now ex-girlfriend had supposedly sent her a message explaining the situation. Michelle checked her messages but found nothing, so she turned to her email. Indeed, there were 2 unread messages, one from her sister and one from her boyfriend. In his message, Brian stated that Yvonne had left him, running off with a new lover to Costa Rica. The other message, supposedly from Yvonne, claimed she had left Brian upon discovering his infidelity and learning that another woman had given birth to his child. It concluded with her saying she had met another man and gone to Costa Rica with him. The other woman turned out to be Brian's old friend, Christine Verhoeven, with whom he had been involved all along, and who was pregnant with his child when he and Yvonne flew to Panama. At first glance, everything seemed plausible and logical, especially since Yvonne couldn't have children. The news that her partner had fathered a child with someone else could have been devastating for her. However, Yvonne wasn't known for impulsive actions, and she would have certainly called her sister to discuss such significant changes in her life. Moreover, the tone of the supposed message from Yvonne was somewhat odd and unlike her previous communications, which raised further suspicions. When Michelle tried to determine her sister's current whereabouts, she couldn't get any concrete information. Calls went unanswered, and the messages that came through were brief and detached, saying things like, "I'm okay. I need some time. I'm not ready to talk about this." Michelle suggested that Brian should join her in filing a missing persons report. Brian appeared nervous but insisted it wasn't necessary, claiming Yvonne was fine, capable of taking care of herself, and would decide when to come home on her own. Despite Brian's reluctance even to discuss the matter and his hasty departure after picking up his vehicle, a message from Yvonne's phone soon arrived, stating she planned to return home in January for their father's birthday. This message provided Michelle with some relief, and she decided to wait a few more weeks, hoping Yvonne would return as indicated in the message. Search efforts and surprising discoveries. By mid-January, not only had Yvonne not returned home, but she also hadn't called even once during that time, and her messages had completely stopped. Moreover, Michelle was shocked to learn that Brian had gotten married to the mother of his child, Christine Verhoeven, right before the new year, which seemed very odd since he had parted ways with his former girlfriend just a few weeks before the celebration. Concerned, Michelle finally went to the police and reported her sister missing, suspecting that Yvonne had not gone to Costa Rica. An official inquiry sent to Panama confirmed her fears. It was definitively established that Yvonne Baldelli had not left the country. Valenzuela then turned to her cousin, a programmer, to help trace the IP address from which Yvonne's messages were sent, determining their actual origin. It turned out the emails, supposedly sent by Yvonne from Costa Rica in December, were actually sent from Dana Point, California, where Brian was located. The same IP address was used for an email sent by Brian himself. With the situation becoming increasingly alarming, Michelle hurriedly informed the police about her discovery. Valenzuela reached out to the FBI and the State Department, sharing her suspicions that Brian had harmed her sister in Panama, and then continued to send messages from her phone and email, pretending to be her for about a month. However, there was not enough solid evidence at the time to arrest him, so law enforcement could only interview him and continue gathering proof of his guilt. It was revealed that Brian had proposed to Christine while still in Panama with Yvonne. He promised Verhoeven that he would soon return. They would get married and raise their daughter together. Moreover, Christine was unaware that her child's father had gone to the island with another woman, as he had told her he was there on business. The family's own investigation. 2 months after the woman's disappearance, her sister and niece personally flew to Panama. There, they sought the expertise of Don Winner, a former U.S. intelligence officer turned investigator specializing in locating missing U.S. citizens. They shared the story of Yvonne's disappearance and the version of events provided by Brian. Winner, after listening to them, immediately expressed concern that the chances of Yvonne being alive were slim. With vast experience in such investigations and leveraging his connections, Winner decided to put pressure on the Panamanian government and publicize the case, turning the disappearance of an American woman into international news. A press conference was also organized with the participation of Yvonne's family members. Later, Yvonne's father, stepmother, brother, and several other relatives and close friends arrived in Panama to join the search and assist the investigation. Together, they went to the tropical island of Carimero, combing it thoroughly, yet they found no trace of Baldelli. Their search efforts were hampered by dense undergrowth and swampy marshes teeming with wildlife. In addition, the family questioned the island's residents about how well they knew Brian and Yvonne and what they could say about them. It turned out that the couple had recently been heavily indulging in alcoholic beverages and were frequently involved in loud disputes, unconcerned about those around them. Almost daily, they were seen in bars drinking alcohol and having heated arguments. Furthermore, people began to notice bruises and scratches on Yvonne's face and body. She almost never took off her sunglasses, seemingly to hide the bruises under her eyes. The landlord of the house the couple had rented confirmed that neighbors regularly complained about the noise, screams, and cursing coming from their residence. Simultaneously, FBI agents brought a special team of divers to the island to scour the waters around it for any potential evidence or remains of the missing woman. Unfortunately, these searches too did not yield any success. The prime suspect and the first solid evidence. From the outset, Ryan was the prime suspect in the case, but there was nothing concrete to charge him with. He denied any involvement, consistently recounting the same story about his ex-partner running off with another man. It wasn't until September 21st, 2012, that Brimmager was finally interrogated, and a search was conducted in his home. At the time, his wife Christine was at work, while Brian was unemployed, staying at home with their child and indulging in his favorite pastime, playing golf. Initially, he appeared confident, repeating that Yvonne had left him after finding out about his child with another woman. However, he became visibly nervous when the police mentioned that the last messages sent in Yvonne's name came from his area and expressed interest in examining the laptop found on his table. The seized laptop turned out to belong to Yvonne, with messages sent from it after she supposedly fled. A photo of the missing woman with a bruise under her eye was found on the computer, as well as a screenshot of a conversation from November, where Brian and Christine discussed their ongoing affair and shared daughter, presumably how Baldelli learned about them. Moreover, the laptop's search history from November 26, 2011, contained queries such as how to clean blood and how to remove blood from a mattress. These pieces of evidence were significant but circumstantial, since neither a body nor a mattress with bloodstains was found. The fact that Brian had been sending messages pretending to be Yvonne didn't definitively prove him guilty. Soon, Don Winter discovered that before leaving Panama, Brimmager had sold a machete he owned. In an online conversation with a potential buyer, he joked that he had used the weapon just once to finish off a stripper. The joke was macabre, prompting authorities to track down the new owner of the machete and seize the blade for examination, which initially revealed nothing conclusive. The long-awaited arrest. The police overlooked another crucial detail: Yvonne's bank card, which Brian used after her disappearance. To add credibility to his story, before returning to the States, he decided to make a trip to Costa Rica and use the missing woman's card a couple of times, creating the illusion that she had indeed fled to that country. He paid for his tickets in cash and withdrew money from different locations in San Jose, draining the card before discarding it. However, Brimmager failed to consider that he was captured on surveillance cameras at the ATMs. It wasn't until July 2013, a year and a half after the woman's disappearance, that her relatives, armed with all the evidence gathered by the police, FBI agents, and Don Winter, finally managed to secure Brian's arrest. Initially, he was detained on charges of making false statements and obstructing the investigation, as there was nothing more substantial to charge him with at that time. By then, he had become a father for the second time. Christine had given birth to a son just a week before his arrest. Authorities attempted to engage the suspect in a candid conversation, offering him a chance to confess to the crime and disclose the location of the body, but Brian consistently denied any wrongdoing. His lawyer also insisted on the absence of a body or direct evidence, proving Yvonne's demise and Brian's involvement in it. The gruesome discovery in the swamp. Just 2 months after Brimmager's arrest, a significant breakthrough occurred in the case. On the island of Carnero, a worker taking a shortcut wandered into the swampy underbrush and spotted an army backpack barely visible above the water's surface. Driven by curiosity and hoping to find something valuable or useful inside, he looked in the bag, only to recoil in horror at the sight of a human skull staring back at him. He immediately reported his find to the police, and responding officers took the backpack for examination. Inside were fragments of a human body, along with the remains of 2 small dogs. The remains had been chopped up, placed in the bag, and discarded in a location where it was assumed they would never be found. DNA testing confirmed that the human remains belonged to Yvonne, although limbs were missing. Pathologists also determined that she had been brutally beaten before her demise, with a broken nose, cheekbone, and several missing teeth. The demise of the dogs was probably orchestrated to lend credence to the narrative, as it seemed implausible that she would willingly leave behind her cherished pets on the island, suggesting a scenario where they were eliminated and laid to rest alongside their owner. When the chop marks found on the victim's bones were matched with the blade of the machete, there was no doubt. The body had been dismembered using this weapon, as each blade has its own signature, akin to a person's fingerprints. With this evidence, Brian was formally charged with murder, dismemberment, and concealing a crime. The trial and verdict. In early 2014, Michelle Valenzuela was diagnosed with an advanced stage of aggressive cancer. She had been so consumed by the investigation into her sister's case that she neglected her deteriorating health, postponing visits to the doctor. After undergoing intensive treatment for about 6 months and realizing it was in vain, she decided to dedicate the last months of her life to seeking justice for her sister. In September 2014, when doctors told Michelle she had only a few weeks left, she declared that although she was losing her battle with the disease, she would continue to fight for her sister until her last breath. Choosing to make her testimony in front of Brian, she detailed everything she knew and submitted all their correspondence with Yvonne to the court. She meticulously described Brian's actions after her sister's disappearance and then fainted from weakness. Michelle passed away 3 days later. The prosecution argued that on the evening of November 26th, following another argument with Yvonne, when she discovered Brian's communications with Christine, Brian, in a fit of rage and under the influence of alcohol, assaulted Yvonne and then fatally stabbed her. He then dismembered her body in the bathtub using a machete, also using it to take the live Yvonne's beloved dogs, and placed the remains in his military backpack. The limbs that didn't fit in the bag were dumped in the ocean, dropped off a rocky cliff early in the morning along with the blood-stained mattress. Brian carried the backpack deep into the island and submerged it in a swamp. For the next few weeks, he continued living in the same coastal house, meticulously erasing any evidence of the crime. He told everyone on the island a story about his flighty girlfriend leaving him for a new lover, a story that sounded convincing enough that locals sympathized with Brian. And he even managed to find a new girlfriend, Nicole Powell, who comforted him for a few weeks until his departure to the U.S. However, at the trial, Nicole testified against Brian, accusing him of lying and cruelty. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Brian was forced to admit his guilt, but insisted that it was self-defense, claiming Yvonne had first attacked him with a knife, which he then used against her. He claimed all subsequent actions were carried out in the state of shock, asserting he didn't remember dismembering and packing the body, taking the lives of the dogs, and so forth. However, his internet searches and attempts to eliminate evidence spoke to his full awareness, and attempts to fabricate a story to justify Yvonne's absence. In the spring of 2016, Brian was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to only 26 years in prison, with the possibility of parole in 2035. His service in the Marines was considered during sentencing, allowing him to avoid a life sentence. Lastly, Brian's wife, Christine Verhoeven, stated she still believed in her husband's innocence and would support him no matter what. On May 2, 2009, in Wausau, Wisconsin, USA, a terrible crime took place. An 18-year-old girl named Brianna Marie Schneller was the victim. For the small town, such an event was shocking, particularly since the girl's death was the result of actions executed with unimaginable cruelty. However, more shocking than the crime itself was the motive behind it. Brianna had a vibrant personality, loved Mexican cuisine, music, and dancing, and she was fond of roller coasters. She was very diligent and performed well academically. She was the top student at Everest High School in Washington, said Craig and Lori Schneller, her parents. She had a trip planned to Tennessee that summer. The young lady was the only one in the state of Wisconsin who had made it through the qualifying rounds of a competition held by a renowned national nonprofit organization for students in professional and technical fields, where she was to present her project. Brianna aspired to pursue higher education in restaurant management and dreamed of someday starting her own business in the food service industry. Therefore, she worked part-time at the El Mezcal restaurant in Rib Mountain to earn money and gain the necessary experience and skills. Friends, colleagues, and even patrons described her as a kind and responsive person. She was just a month away from significant milestones in her life. She was about to graduate from school and marry her beloved 22-year-old Sebastian Ramirez. Initially, her parents objected to their relationship and the age difference. In their view, their daughter had matured too quickly. However, after getting to know the young man better, they trusted him. It was evident that he genuinely loved Brianna and had serious intentions regarding their future together. The couple moved in together, renting an apartment on 12th Avenue in Wausau along with Sebastian's 19-year-old brother, Hugo. Outwardly, it seemed that the trio got along well and lived peacefully. Many envied their friendship. The brothers supported Brianna's interests, as they also worked at a restaurant called El Tequila Salsa in the same area. It is possible that one workday was when Sebastian and Brianna met each other. In any case, no one expected that a horrific tragedy could disrupt the plans and dreams of the two lovers. The morning of May 2nd, 2009 began as usual. Sebastian was the first to rise in the house. He didn't want to wake the girls sweetly sleeping beside him. It was a day off, and she didn't need to rush to school. While the young man was in the shower, Brianna woke up. They exchanged sweet greetings and discussed their plans for the day. Meanwhile, Sebastian tried to wake up Hugo, who had come home in the early morning and had clearly overdone it at a party the night before. After that, Sebastian left for work, which was only a 5-10-minute walk away. His younger brother followed soon after. The girl stayed home alone. She exchanged messages with her mother and then got on with her tasks. That day, Hugo felt restless. He had a headache from too much drinking and regretted overindulging. Struggling to focus, he decided to swap lunch breaks with a colleague, and at 1:20 p.m., he headed home to catch some sleep. When he entered the apartment, nothing seemed unusual at first. However, as he walked further, he noticed a disorder in his brother's and his girlfriend's room. For some reason, Brianna was lying on the floor. Hugo rushed to her and asked what happened, but she did not respond. He didn't immediately notice the blood. The young man moved the towel that had been covering her face and screamed. She was unrecognizably disfigured. He grabbed the phone to call the emergency services, but his hands were shaking and his mind was foggy. Nevertheless, he knew he had to act, and he ran to his neighbor's apartment, a floor below. Through tears, young Ramirez tried to explain what had happened and asked the woman to call for help. At 1:30 p.m., the emergency services received a call. Despite it being a Saturday, the day was far from peaceful. Unfortunately, incidents often occur on days when people are supposed to relax. The woman on the other end of the line reported that she was calling on behalf of a neighbor. He had asked her to summon emergency medical services for his brother's girlfriend. The unfortunate woman lay on the floor with cuts on her body and a disfigured face, showing no signs of life. Police and paramedics were dispatched to the address immediately. The parking lot of the apartment building was crowded, but one individual stood out from the crowd and approached them. It was Hugo Ramirez. He led the officers to the apartment. The young man could barely speak, so he simply pointed out the shocking scene. At the center of it all lay Brianna, her body bearing deep wounds. Stab wounds were evident on her chest, neck, and wrist. The officers asked the young man to leave the room while forensic specialists began their examination. One speculated that the victim had been lying there for some time, as the blood scattered everywhere had already started to dry. It was clear she had fought back, as evidenced by the defensive cuts on her arms. However, the assailant had overpowered her. The crime scene was rife with evidence. The first thing the forensic team noticed was a bloody iron lying on the floor, broken with some pieces scattered nearby. It appeared that the criminal had used it to strike her face. 2 knives lay in the bathroom sink, one missing its sharp tip. Blood was found on the soap, leading investigators to speculate that the criminal had used it to wash their hands. But the bloodied shoe print left on the carpet drew more attention. Overall, the examination of the dwelling revealed several curious details. There appeared to be no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the victim knew the wrongdoer or that he had some way of gaining entry to the apartment. Another notable detail was the scattered bills ranging from $1 to $20, amounting to a substantial sum. Hugo explained that these were tips they had accumulated at work, so much so that they were just placed anywhere. At first glance, nothing seemed to be missing from the apartment. Everything pointed to the fact that Brianna was the target of the attack, not robbery. This was confirmed by the broken knife tip found in her body. What kind of force was necessary to break a knife? Who could harbor such feelings towards a young woman? And most importantly, what could have been the cause of such unprecedented cruelty and aggression? Eager to shed light on the matter, law enforcement officers were keen to speak with the girl's relatives and close friends, especially as they needed to convey the dreadful news. In the police department's office, Craig and Lori Schneller awaited news. They had heard that something terrible had occurred at the home where their daughter lived, but unfortunately, they had been unable to contact her. With heavy hearts, they went to the police station seeking answers. The officers had to confirm the parents' worst fears were indeed true. There was no greater sorrow for parents than to endure the loss of a child. The devastating news split the Schneller's life into before and after. Authorities provided photographs of Brianna for identification. The process was a mere formality, as her identity was already established, but protocol required it. Due to the horrific injuries, not all photographs taken at the scene were shown to the family. Only those that showed part of her face were displayed. Once confirmed, the Schnellers could hardly believe what had happened. After consulting with a psychologist, Craig and Lori were able to answer a series of questions. They were eager to assist the investigation and catch the person responsible, so they provided as much information about their daughter's life as possible. The parents insisted that she had no known enemies or ill-wishers, at least to their knowledge. It was also revealed that Brianna's mother was the last person she had communicated with. That morning, Lori had taken Brianna's car to the auto repair shop and had messaged her daughter around 10 a.m. to inform her. Brianna had responded. This means that the tragic incident occurred after she spoke with her mother and before Hugo's arrival, establishing a timeline for the events. The police launched a comprehensive investigation. The first to be invited for an interview by the detectives were the Rodriguez brothers, Sebastian and Hugo, who were questioned separately. The fiancé of the victim, Sebastian, reported that he woke up at 9:15 in the morning, had a brief conversation with Brianna while getting ready for work, and then woke his brother. By 10:15, he was already at the restaurant. He learned about the incident after receiving a phone call. Hugo's account matched, stating he left the house about 15 minutes after Sebastian. He returned home at 1:20 p.m. because he was feeling unwell and wanted to rest. However, his illness and fatigue vanished when he discovered Brianna lifeless. After that, everything seemed like a blur. He explained that he was so stunned that he couldn't think straight on how to react properly. His mind shut down and his hands trembled, leaving him to run to a neighbor and ask for help. The Ramirez brothers' statements were credible and their distress appeared genuine. However, the police had often encountered convincing performances before, so they needed solid proof of their innocence. It was entirely possible that one of them was the perpetrator and the other was covering for him. Therefore, detectives inquired about their relationships with each other. Sebastian declared his love for Brianna and his anticipation for their upcoming wedding. Hugo was asked if he had any grievances against his brother's girlfriend, or if they had quarreled, to which he responded negatively. He also clarified that despite her attractiveness and charm, he had no intentions toward her because he valued their good relationship and would never interfere with Sebastian's happiness. Brianna was like a sister to him. The interrogations lasted for hours, yet neither brother aroused any suspicion. After taking DNA samples from the young men, they were allowed to return home. To confirm or refute the Ramirez brothers' alibis, detectives interviewed employees of El Tequila Salsa restaurant and reviewed the establishment's surveillance footage. Sebastian and Hugo's accounts were corroborated. The theory of a domestic-related crime was dismissed. Then who was the murderer of this innocent young woman? Could there be a predator in the city? Perhaps he had been watching Brianna earlier and had learned much about her. Maybe on a day when she was alone, he executed his criminal intent. The investigation continued. By this point, the autopsy results had come in, confirming the initial suspicions of the police. The sequence of the crime was reconstructed as follows. Brianna first sustained a blunt force injury to the head, likely with an iron. Then the perpetrator cut her throat, followed by multiple stab wounds to her body. The ferocity and relentlessness of the attack were evidenced by the number of wounds, which were so numerous that even experts couldn't tally them. At least 2 of these injuries were immediately fatal. The young woman fought fiercely for her life, as indicated by the foreign DNA found under her nails. Later developments revealed that earlier statements claiming nothing was missing from the home were incorrect. The victim's phone had disappeared. Sebastian discovered the loss and promptly informed the detectives. This piece of information became a critical lead, as once the police received this new clue, they began searching for the mobile device. Rihanna's cell phone provider reported that her phone was still active and provided its location. It turned out that the phone had been nearby all along, specifically within the premises of the restaurant where Sebastian and Hugo worked. The investigation grew more complex with the brothers' undeniable alibi, and one of them reporting the missing phone against the backdrop of suspicious coincidences. Detectives urgently traveled to the specified location, but upon arrival, they found that the coordinates led to the parking lot of a shopping center housing the restaurant. It appeared the sought-after item was in one of the trash bins. After a brief search, a plastic takeout bag with the logo of El Tequila Salsa was found inside a container. Within the bag were the girl's phone, 2 mismatched gloves, and a pair of women's underwear. One of the gloves was stained with blood. This unexpected discovery shifted the narrative, as theories about a predator and a crime driven by intimate motives began to gain traction. The bag and its contents were sent to the laboratory for further examination, potentially still holding fingerprints or DNA from the perpetrator. When shown a photo of the contents, Sebastian recognized his girlfriend's underwear. The investigation proceeded with numerous interrogations of the restaurant staff. On May 5th, everyone was asked to provide DNA samples and undergo examinations for any scratches or injuries. Additionally, both the external and internal surveillance footage of the building and neighboring establishments was thoroughly reviewed. The police had a considerable task ahead of them to determine who had disposed of the bag. Initially, a kitchen worker attracted attention because he was notably late for work, arriving when Brianna was already lifeless. However, the young man had an alibi. He had been stopped for speeding on his way to the restaurant. Nonetheless, reviewing the surveillance footage proved invaluable to the investigation. Another individual, the 24-year-old kitchen manager Raul Ponce-Rocha, became a person of interest. On the day of the crime, he left the building at 10:18 a.m. wearing a brown hoodie and returned at 10:53 a.m. without it. During questioning, he was asked about his whereabouts and intentions. Raul explained that he had gone to pick up his friend Luciano, a dishwasher at the restaurant. Interestingly, Luciano lived in the same building as Brianna, Sebastian, and Hugo. When asked how long his errand took, he said about 20 minutes, but there was a problem with the timeline. What happened in the remaining 15 minutes? Raul refused to explain. Meanwhile, Luciano confirmed Raul's story, saying they did not stop anywhere on their way to work. However, the 15-minute discrepancy continued to trouble the detectives, and Raul's behavior raised questions. He had cuts on his hands, which he attributed to working with knives. Raul was clearly suspicious, but there wasn't enough evidence for his detention. By May 9th, it was established that on May 2nd, at 1:16 p.m., a single employee exited the back door of El Tequila Salsa, and at the same time, only one person approached the trash bins. Identifying the suspect took little time. When his name was announced, the investigative team was not surprised. It was not Sebastian or Hugo Ramirez, as initially thought, but the suspect Raul Ponce-Rocha. When a search warrant was obtained for his home, curious details about the manager's life emerged. Under the mattress of his bed were found 4 pairs of women's underwear, several adult videos along with a brown hoodie and a glove resembling the one found in the trash bin. On the same day, Raul's DNA samples were sent for comparison with those found on the plastic bag. A strand of female hair found on his clothing was also analyzed. Everything pointed to the victim, Brianna. It was just a matter of matching the test results. Raul was arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder. When it became known that the alleged perpetrator had been found, Sebastian couldn't believe his ears. He never thought his colleague capable of such cruelty. The main question that troubled him was, why did he do it? They hardly knew Brianna and had only seen her in passing. Raoul had always seemed like a kind and cheerful guy, someone who wouldn't hurt a fly. But the answer was found. The trial of Raoul Ponce Rocha took place in 2011. Despite the lengthy investigation, Ponce Rocha never admitted guilt and consistently denied any involvement in the crime. However, the prosecution presented compelling evidence. The defendant's DNA was found on all key pieces of evidence: the iron, the knives, the plastic bag and its contents, and under Brianna's fingernails. Additionally, a shoe print found on the carpet at the crime scene matched the size and pattern of the suspect's shoes. The investigation painted a clear picture of the events. On May 2, 2009, Raoul arrived at work at 9 a.m. En route to the restaurant, he passed the victim's house, a place that had long piqued his interest. Not seeing her car, he assumed she was out and saw it as an opportune moment to enter her apartment and take what he desired. The accused had a peculiar habit of collecting women's underwear, the evidence of which was found under his mattress. After the Rodriguez brothers arrived at work, Raoul left the restaurant under the guise of picking up Luciano. Instead of signaling his friend immediately upon arrival, he entered the victim's apartment. He easily unlocked the door and entered. It appears he went into Brianna's room and began rummaging through her belongings. He was likely caught off guard at that moment. Otherwise, he could have excused his unexpected presence by claiming he was looking for one of the brothers and that the door had been open. Realizing the absurdity of the situation and fearing recognition, he struck her with the first object he could find, an iron. He then slashed her throat with a knife, followed by inflicting multiple injuries. The investigation concluded that the process of taking her life seemed to gratify him, as evidenced by the excessive number of wounds inflicted on the poor victim. It also noted that Raoul used multiple knives during the attack. Afterwards, the culprit tried to cover his tracks by washing his hands and removing his jacket, as he still had to meet Luciano and drive him to the restaurant. He then resumed work, as if nothing had happened, which was captured on the kitchen's video recordings. When many staff took their lunch breaks, he seized the moment to dispose of the bag containing the evidence in a trash bin. Shortly before the trial, Raoul stated that he indeed met with Brianna, but did not end her life. However, he suspected who might have done it and named a former restaurant employee. According to the defendant, he saw this acquaintance at Brianna's house on the day her life was tragically ended, thus confirming that he indeed entered the Ramirez apartment. However, when he left, Sergio stayed with Brianna, apparently having an argument. The defendant's statement raised additional questions and investigations. The information he provided was subject to verification. Moreover, the individual he mentioned was abroad. Nonetheless, authorities managed to contact Sergio. He even appeared at the trial to testify his non-involvement and refute Raoul's slander. The young man easily proved that he was not in the country on the day of the crime. Weeks before, he had left to care for his gravely ill father in Mexico. Apparently, the defendant hoped that contact with Sergio would not be established, thereby sowing a seed of doubt among the jurors. However, his plan failed. The defendant merely emphasized that he had no qualms about falsely accusing an innocent person of a heinous crime. It was clear that he felt no remorse for his actions. During the trial, Brianna's relatives, as well as Sebastian and Hugo, were present. The young men struggled to contain their emotions, prompting officers to repeatedly call for calm. Ultimately, Raoul Ponce Rocha was found guilty of the crime against Brianna Schneller, as well as burglary. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He is serving his sentence at a correctional institution in Walpoon, Wisconsin. Following the verdict, the victim's father stated that his daughter's case had become personal for many involved, as they all have families and children. He shared that he has not parted with a Father's Day card Brianna gave him, cherishing every memory of her. Craig Schneller confessed that Brianna's death broke his heart, and he lost faith. No information about Sebastian Ramirez is available. It is only to be hoped that he has closed this tragic chapter of his life with a sense of completeness and has been able to move forward. One day, his brother Hugo appeared on a television show discussing the ordeal they endured. Raul's actions were fatal for Brianna. He not only ended the life of a beautiful young woman, but also devastated the hearts of her family. Things could have been different if the young man had not chosen to cover his tracks. He might have gotten away with clumsy explanations and apologies to the girl. At most, it would have ended with a confrontation between him and the Rodriguez brothers. It is unlikely the victim would have reported him to the police, and even then, the incident could have been resolved with minimal harm.